Chapter 2559. If this goes on, the side mission won't increase again. Because of the purpose of the side mission. It was to wake Shaya up. There was no future in being a substitute, so he couldn't be a substitute. If he rushed to be a substitute, wouldn't it make it impossible for her to complete the mission? Wei Wei Bai was paralyzed on the chair, her face full of despair. The young man's soft kisses gently fell on her hair, little by little, like raindrops falling. The effect of the drug on her body was a little less, and she could move her fingers. Because it was annoying, looking at Xia Mosquito was even more annoying. She reached out and slapped his face weakly but firmly. Go away. Shaya was thick-skinned. She slapped him so weakly. It didn't affect him at all, but her resistance made him look down silently. The dark storm in his eyes finally turned into a sinister, evil aura. His fingers hooked on the ribbon, clasped her wrist, and lovingly and ambiguously licked the inside of her wrist. Her smooth and tender skin was like pudding. Bai Weiwei wanted to break free, but found that the ribbon was already wrapped around her, section by section. It doesn't matter if you don't like me. Anyway, you won't be able to see anyone in the future. You can only go out if you like me. Weiwei Bai's mouth twitched. The feeling deepened as time passed. Xia Mosquito's blackening value was higher. Looking at the stand-in bar, it was only 60, but Xia Mosquito had already blackened to the point of being perverted. If the bar rose to 100, that blackness was unimaginable. After wrapping his hands around her weak hands, Shaya looked up and looked around. Under the beautiful crystal candlesticks, on the long conference table, the decorative roses were in full bloom. He tugged at his cumbersome and gorgeous collar and smiled very cutely. The environment here is good. During my coming-of-age ceremony, after the castle was built, I deliberately chose this place as the conference hall. Weiwei Bai looked at him strangely. Then she looked at her hands strangely. Finally, she looked at the pervert and snapped his fingers. Everything on the table disappeared. The long table, the gorgeous and clean surface. Only the broken rose petals on the table, scattered into an irregular carpet under the effect of magic. Shaya smiled happily, picked up the bewildered girl, and put her on the table. Then he whispered in her ear, in a low whisper, "Do you like it here?" Weiwei Bai's eyes widened as she finally realized something. But the young man on top of her was indifferent. "You probably don't like it because you don't like anything about me." Because it was a substitute. Therefore, from the very beginning, all her love was for the right person. Substitutes were not loved. No matter how humble his love was, he would only receive her pity. This was something she could only get when she was in a good mood. But now, he couldn't even get a trace of pity from her. She was such a soft-hearted person, but she was so cruel to him. Shaya felt that he was really going crazy, because he had received that kind of affectionate and beautiful treatment. In that simple and dark little room, he felt the warmth of emotion that he had never felt before. However, he immediately took it back. It was too unfair.
So, what did she resent?
He was the one who should be resentful. Once Viper obtained too much, he would take it all back one day. Viper would not be grateful for the good memories you gave him. He would only resent the person who took it back. Because Viper was such an ungrateful, greedy, and terrible creature. Shaya looked at the girl's panicked and helpless eyes. He stretched out his finger and gently covered her eyes. "When did you start to like me, Weiwei?"
T.
Chapter 2560. This sentence was obviously very humble, but he said as if he didn't care. There was also a slight resistance and a weak struggle. "You can go out whenever you like me." As if he was pitying her, the youth's low voice sounded suppressed. "So, hurry up and like me. Like your uncle." Weiwei Bai held the most expensive and best cherry dessert in the capital this year and ate it expressionlessly. If she didn't eat more, her body would collapse sooner or later. Her fingers holding the spoon were trembling. People can't be too tired. If they were too tired, they would be like her. Her hands and feet would tremble, her brain would be slow, and she would have dementia and Parkinson's disease. A good man is more tired. He won't die of exhaustion. After Weiwei Bai finished the dessert, The maid lowered her head and left without saying a word. The second maid immediately came over and held a porcelain cup decorated with flowers. Inside was warm sweet tea and several plates of exquisite biscuits. There was a huge living room and a huge stained glass window. It was snowing heavily outside. The blood-red roses were climbing outside the glass window, looking exceptionally beautiful. The living room was as warm as spring. A dozen maids lined up to serve their master. The flames in the fireplace were magic flames. It ensured that there was no cold air in the entire castle. A beautiful long-haired cat lay obediently at Wei Wei Bai's feet, meowing pleasingly. The carpet was made of the most expensive animal fur. There were gorgeous decorations made of money everywhere. The candlesticks and lamps were made of gold. Money corrodes people's hearts. Wei Wei Bai sighed. If she hadn't seen such a big scene, it would have been corroded by Xiaoya's move. This was the standard of living of the top nobles. Even in the capital, there weren't many who could be as luxurious as Xiaoya. Wei Wei Bai said that she wasn't the kind of person who would be corroded by this thing, so she drank the sweet tea expressionlessly. It was good to have more sugar. She had lost a few kilograms of weight. If she continued to lose weight, she would become a skeleton. She wouldn't have to care about the punishment of the side quest and would be disfigured automatically. Wei Wei Bai drank her tea and looked at the heavy snow outside the window. Her witch mark was still there. However, she was restrained by an unusually domineering power, and no magic detection could reveal her identity. Now, there was no chance for him to jump around. Just verbal attacks were no longer enough to make the substitute advance horizontally. Moreover, if the verbal attack was too much, Xiaoya wouldn't do anything. He would only do that thing. Now, he was enjoying himself. He was just waiting for her to retaliate. He could use this as a pretext to make a fuss. Wei Wei Bai refused to be tricked and could only think of other ways to provoke him. The only way to provoke him now was to cheat on him and be cuckolded. But she was surrounded by maids. As long as it was a man, even the housekeeper would not show up. Even if he did show up occasionally, he would be at least 3 meters away from her, and the time between them would not exceed 3 seconds. Actually, a maid would do as well. However, Wei Wei Bai glanced at the maids with hidden bitterness. All of them were over 40 years old. She was more like a nanny than a maid. Moreover, they were mute nannies. All of them had undergone the most professional training and would definitely not open their mouths. No matter how much she talked to herself, it was useless. She couldn't get out, and she couldn't be cuckolded. Wei Wei Bai sighed expressionlessly. These days, imprisonment was as old-fashioned as Xiaoya. She hadn't seen many of them. Other than that, there was only that. Couldn't there be something new in imprisonment? Even the imprisonment plots in novels were starting to be innovative. What imprisonment to do homework? Imprisonment to do exam questions? Imprisonment to memorize pi. This sounded even worse than the old-fashioned imprisonment plot. Why was it? To facilitate your next reading, you can click on Chapter 2561. Wei Wei Bai's face was bitter. Forget it, so be it. I'll politely decline this kind of innovation. She finished her tea and put down the cup, continuing to think about the strategy. Because she was too engrossed in her thoughts, she slowly turned around when the air around her became quiet. She saw that the maid had already retreated. The boy walked in with graceful steps. He took off his coat and threw it on the chair. Under his honey-colored hair, the cold, murderous intent in his purple eyes hadn't faded, as if he had just experienced a battle outside. His body smelled of snow and blood. He took off his coat and gorgeous underwear. The boy's upper body was bare, his smooth and delicate skin whiter than snow. The smelly clothes were taken off. He wore trousers and walked directly to the girl sitting obediently on the chair. The cat accompanying the girl stood up and rubbed against Wei Wei Bai's ankle, about to call out flatteringly. Xiaoya kicked the cat, and it rolled and disappeared outside the door. Then Xiaoya smiled and said, "Did you miss me, Wei Wei?" Wei Wei Bai lowered her eyes, expressionless. Her lips were pursed, and she was as lifeless as a porcelain doll. Wei Wei Bai frowned, her fingers pinching her palms. She wanted to resist, but she thought of something and could only look away indifferently. Out of sight, out of mind. Shaya's fingers ran down her long hair, gently combing it. It didn't matter if she was indifferent or didn't like him. He was so gentle to her that it was frightening. Except for forcing her on a certain matter, he was almost obedient to her. Of course, there was going out. The rumor that Grand Duke Rose's wife was weak and had been ill for a long time had spread everywhere. The aristocratic circle was actually similar to gossipy women. Any rumor could spread throughout the capital overnight. Shaya squatted beside her chair, playing with her beautiful fingers, and rested his face on her thigh. Just like the magic long-haired cat that he bought for her, she squinted her eyes and smiled cutely. Wei Wei, there's an auction of antique jewelry at the aristocratic banquet today. What do you like? I'll buy it for you, okay? Wei Wei buy. Antique jewelry? Do you have a ruby the size of a pigeon egg? Do you have emeralds the size of a fist? If there were, he would buy a basket to broaden his horizons. She also liked gemstones. After all, the shiny ones could be used as light bulbs. However, she was a naive, romantic, and loyal little witch who couldn't yield to force and couldn't be corrupted by wealth. Her answer was, I don't like it. After saying that, she seemed to have thought of something and frowned. Her tone was hesitant and jerky. I don't know what I like. If I could see it, I might know. She was too nervous when she said this. As a result, his tone was trembling, and even his gaze was erratic. She wanted to go out. He really wanted to go out. It was so obvious that even his lies were so perfunctory. Shaya was still smiling, but the coldness in his eyes spread out. He nuzzled the skirt on her knees. It was soft and made of the finest silk. A luxurious cage, an honorable prison, binding his most precious girl. When they were in that small house, he saw her diligently doing housework and working hard to support the family. Although it was warm and sweet. But what flashed in his mind was that she should stay in the luxurious castle he built. Not exposed to the wind and rain, not doing any labor, and not suffering any poverty. Chapter 2562. That man was just a skeleton with no real power. Even after his death, he was just a skeleton in the family's low-level cemetery. That baron gave her nothing but poverty. Why was she unwilling to look at him? Shaya left her lap. The slender and fair young man sat casually on the carpet. His hands were on the carpet as he tilted his head and smiled. You really want to go out? Wei Wei Bai's pupils shrank. Her breathing became a little chaotic. Then, she refused to speak. So stingy. She didn't even want to talk to him anymore after he exposed her intentions. Shaya felt that the fire in his heart was about to erupt again. He had taken advantage of her during this period of time. Like a cat that had been satisfied, the beast in his heart was suppressed and not released. That was why he could remain rational in the face of her disgusted attitude. But he found that he still couldn't stand her indifference to him. Shaya wickedly curled up the corners of her mouth. Her bright red thin lips were as enchanting and strange as flower petals. His dark purple eyes were full of bewitchment. The young man was like a demon that was so beautiful that it could make people commit crimes. He stretched out his beautiful fingers and spoke with a smile. But it was surprisingly strong. If you want to go out, you have to make me happy. Or like me. He said this in an almost commanding tone. He had too little patience for her. When she liked him, he was very patient. He even thought that he could be a substitute for 100 years and not change. But when she found out that she liked the wrong person, he was even disliked for being a substitute. His patience for her had turned into a terrifying possessiveness. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but look at him. She frowned, but her face was red. It seemed that she couldn't stand the scene. Then she scolded in a low voice, "You're shameless, shameless." Shaya smiled lazily. You can actually scold me worse. The more you scold me, the happier I will be. Shaya looked at the antique mechanical clock and moved forward bit by bit. His voice was low and hoarse. This is the last chance. If you let it go, I won't let you go out in the future no matter how much you like me. Those rumors about her weak body. He didn't stop her. She might not be able to leave the house for the rest of her life. Wasn't being sick the best excuse? When Wei Wei Bai heard this, She finally couldn't take it anymore and stood up. She looked like she wanted to trample him to death. Anger added a beautiful light to her lifeless eyes. She seemed to want to scold him. Xiao looked up at her, knowing that she would not admit defeat. She didn't like him. That was why she couldn't say that she liked him no matter what. No one held Xiao's outstretched hand. A trace of self-mocking helplessness flashed through his lazy and charming purple eyes. Just as he was about to retract his hand, suddenly, there was a touch as soft as a feather on his palm. He looked up in surprise, only to see Wei Bai reach out as if she was about to hold his hand. But in the next second, she bit her lip in regret and wanted to take her hand back. Xiao instinctively held her hand and pulled her into his embrace. Bai Weiwei, along with her skirt, was tightly held by Xiao. His tone became excited.
Why?
Have you thought of a way to make me happy? Or are you willing to say that you like me? Weiwei Bai's body stiffened, as if she wanted to escape. But as long as she tried, he would tighten his grip and press her into his embrace. Let me hug you. Maybe I'll be happy and let you out. She immediately stopped moving and was quiet. The hostility in Xiao's eyes disappeared a little. This was a good start. As long as she was willing to come into contact with him, she would really accept him one day. Xiao hugged her, his thoughts pure and dark. Weiwei Bai, who was hiding in his embrace, was silent for a long time before she hesitantly asked in a soft voice, "Are you happy?" Xiao lazily replied, "Yes." Weiwei Bai asked again, "Then can I go out?" Xia, I'm suddenly unhappy again. Weiwei Bai, Xia, of course, if you kiss me. Weiwei Bai hesitated again and again before she finally carefully kissed his delicate chin. Xia was sluggish for a moment before he lowered his head in disbelief. He had just casually said it, he didn't expect it to come true. Weiwei Bai had already lowered her eyes again. Under her dark eyelashes, her expression was obscure. Is it okay? But for some reason, when her soft voice sounded with a hint of pleading, "Are you happy?" his heart was heavily scratched. "Yes," he replied in a low voice. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 85. The happiest thing was not that he bullied her, but that she was willing to get close to him, even if it was fake. Transmigration system. Adonis, come here. Transmigration system. Adonis, come here, comma. Chapter 2563. The two people's relationship was so tragic, but it was still difficult to increase the favorability. It simply made Weiwei Bai speechless. Shouldn't it increase the stand-in bar? What's the use of just increasing the favorability? Weiwei Bai felt that her face had already reached the point where it was in danger. She looked at the reflection on the window of the carriage, afraid that when she woke up one day, she would see her own rotten skeleton face. Thinking about it, she felt that Xia Mosquito's face was even more repulsive. Xiao sat beside her, his fingers interlocked with hers intimately. But she indifferently looked out of the carriage. Her beautiful pink face only had a light layer of rouge, as if she was going to a banquet to deal with it. Her hair was tied up in a gorgeous and fashionable fluffy bun. Red roses and a few rubies were embellished in her hair. He had forced her to wear a red antique gem necklace. This was the Rose family's inherited antique gem. It was a symbol of status and also a kind of oath. When others saw it, they would know that she was his wife. Weiwei Bai's indifferent eyes did not have a trace of light, only empty and absent-minded. Her thoughts were not here at all. It was as if her soul had left his side. Xiao did not utter a word. Half of his face was hidden in the shadows. The gorgeous and exquisite youth was more like a gloomy and ice-cold statue. Only his eyes were deeply focused on her. Like a demon coveting a girl, although gloomy, it was full of a dangerous and dark temperament. Weiwei Bai seemed to feel something. Her eyelashes trembled. Then she slowly looked back, only to see Xiao smile, unusually gentle. It was completely without the gloomy temperament just now. Weiwei Bai expressionlessly looked away, feeling a chill on her back. She felt like someone was cursing her. Seeing her look away, Xiao's expression darkened. Weiwei Bai must complete the side mission before the favorability reaches 100. so she did not put her thoughts on the favorability at all. It was fine as long as she did not drop it. She must not randomly increase it. The side mission was only 60, and the favorability was 85. If she accidentally brushed up too much favorability points, her face would be ruined in a matter of minutes. Wei Wei Bai discussed with the system. We need to use a big move. Isn't that Bai Yueguang still in the graveyard? Let's dig it out and revive her. The system was shocked. You want to dig up graves and steal corpses? Wei Wei Bai, isn't this for the mission? The system said, I thought you were just a little imbalanced. I didn't expect you to not even let a dead person go. Where are your morals? Wei Wei Bai, what are morals? No, I mean, of course I have normal values, high morals, and perfect character. But we're in a special situation now, so we have to be treated differently. In the face of the host's boasting, the system was able to calmly ignore it. You can't dig up graves and dig up corpses during special times. Besides, aren't you afraid of ghosts? Wei Wei Bai hesitantly touched her face. Yes, I am afraid of ghosts, but when I think about my disfigurement, I suddenly have nothing to fear. System. Why is the host so obsessed with looks? Wei Wei Bai, or else the side quest won't budge. If words hit the limit, Xia Mosquito won't care at all. He did everything he could: scold, refuse, and resist. The bar didn't budge at all. Xiao was determined to be a substitute. So, he could only find the real person and tell him that the substitute technique had no future. Only then could he give up on the idea of a substitute. Every time Xiao looked at him affectionately and said, If you treat me as him, I can learn very well. The stand-in bar was all backwards. She was about to vomit blood.
T.
Chapter 2564. I've never seen someone who loves to be a substitute so much. Don't most people think it's shameful to be a substitute? System. You need to be able to escape before you can revive Xia Yueguang. This is a magical world, not a normal world. Any random magic array would be able to capture her. Who told the host not to choose light magic immunity? Most people in this world learn light magic. The male lead is also a light archmage. Even if he designed magic, it's definitely not that profound. If the host was immune to magic, the chances of escaping would be much higher. Wei Wei Bai also found it tricky. With a sticky dog by her side, it was indeed difficult to leave. This problem made her feel awkward until the carriage stopped. A servant came to open the door. Xiaya held her fingers. Only then did she suddenly come back to her senses and turn to look at him blankly. Under the red roses, there was a layer of light pink on her cheeks. She was beautiful and elegant. Although she didn't look at him, at this moment, Xiaya felt his heart flutter. His breathing paused for a long time and then said softly, I really don't want you to go out. Her beauty attracted the people in this circle. The only pure light in the darkness. The only delicate treasure in the bloody flowers. After he got her, he really didn't want to share even half of her with others. Wei Wei Bai was about to frown unhappily. Xiaya smiled and lowered his head, kissing her fingers, whispering sweetly, I lied to you. I just want you to be happy. This kiss was full of greedy possessiveness, but also a bit of elegance. Then Xiaya took the lead to get off the carriage and pulled her down. Because of the dress, her body was unsteady. The boy who got off first had already accurately reached out his arm and hugged her by the waist. She exclaimed, and couldn't help but hug his neck with both hands. Xia didn't care about other people's shocked gazes and stepped forward. The person who held the banquet today was Marquis Paris, a subordinate of the Rose family. Ever since the conflict between the Rose family and the royal family, there have been many bloody battles in the kingdom. All kinds of schemes were carried out in the dark. Most of the nobles chose to side with the Rose family because of Xia, the only divine great magician. Previously, when Xia had disappeared, the nobles who took sides were all flustered. Now that Xia had reappeared, all eyes were once again fixed on Rose Duchess. There was also his mysterious wife, who never showed her face. All kinds of invitations were sent to Rose Castle. No one held out much hope. After all, everyone knew that the Grand Duke of Rose rarely attended banquets. If he really wanted to participate, he would come and go in a hurry. In the end, when the Marquis received the news that the banquet was coming, he forcibly raised the standard of the banquet to the highest in a short period of time. As for the rest of the nobles who felt that they didn't need to participate because of their higher status, when he heard that the Duke was bringing his wife to the banquet, he was shocked. He directly drove a carriage here without even an invitation. He didn't even care about courtesy. Moreover, many people were very curious about the Duke's wife. Everyone knew that the Rose Duchess was famous for being cold and distant. Previously, anyone who sent a girl over usually didn't end up well. After a long time, everyone calmed down. Suddenly, the news of the Rose Duchess marriage came. This left everyone dumbfounded. Those who had daughters at home were even more regretful. Although the Duke was ruthless and terrifying, even if she really married him, she wouldn't have a good ending. However, it was good to be able to get close to the Rose family. This was a good opportunity. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on that. Chapter 2565. No one thought that the Duke of Rose would be kind to a woman. Even if it was his own wife, he would probably treat her coldly and with a cold face. This idea was completely shattered when the Duke of Rose stepped through the door. At the gorgeous door, the two groups of servants who were welcoming the distinguished guest were stunned. The person who came had a head of bright honey-colored short hair and stunning purple eyes that were sweeter than wine. He was dressed in a male aristocratic attire, and his perfectly proportioned slender body gave off a sense of frivolity when compared to any luxurious decorations. A silver chain hung down from his chest pocket, and a rose adorned the chain. Whenever he appeared, it was like the sun shrouding the dark earth. Everyone couldn't help but focus their eyes on him. But this time, everyone's eyes were unexpectedly fixed on the girl in his arms. The black gauze covered half of the girl's face. Only her bright red lips could be faintly seen. And her small and perfect chin. She seemed to be very reluctant and wanted to struggle. But she couldn't escape the youth's embrace. Her petite figure was like a fragile little bird, pitifully curled up in his arms. On the contrary, the always cold and ruthless Grand Duke Xiaya revealed a slightly flattering smile. There are so many people here. I'm worried that you won't be able to adapt. It's better to wear a veil. He just didn't want her to be seen by others. Especially when he walked out of the carriage. Immediately, when stunned gazes fell on her, almost reflexively, he turned around and returned to the carriage. If it wasn't for Wei Wei by clutching the carriage door tightly and shouting, "You liar, I hate you," he really left directly. He didn't want to admit that when she appeared in front of the world, she received countless praising gazes. The ugly jealousy in his heart was so sad and lowly. In the end, he compromised and put the gauze on her, pulling off a few roses in her hair. He couldn't wait to make her more ordinary. But even with the gauze, it couldn't stop the covetous gazes of others. Look at those damned rotten nobles. Almost everyone's eyes fell on her. The nobles, purely curious, shocked that the cold Duke had changed his nature. Wei Wei Bai was speechless. Wouldn't it be even more eye-catching to wear this stupid thing? She really wanted to pull away, but when she saw Xiaoya's red eyes, as well as the hostility in them, she couldn't help but think. Only then did she silently put down her hand. Then she whispered, "Let me down." He even wanted to find a chance to slip away. In the end, with such a big fanfare, she would probably be watched from the beginning to the end of this banquet. Xiaoya's footsteps paused, and his cold and murderous gaze swept over everyone. This frightening aura made those who didn't know better think that they were on the battlefield. Being stared at by a great magician, everyone lowered their heads in fear. Wei Wei Bai, why did it feel like bandits had entered the village? The next moment they were going to burn, kill, and loot, right? After confirming that no one dared to look at them, Xiaya put her down on the ground. Then, he clasped her hand tightly with his fingers. When he was sure that she couldn't shake him off, he narrowed his eyes in satisfaction. Wei Wei Bai felt like running away. How could he not spend his HP? How much HP did Summer Mosquito cost her? She really didn't plan to spend any HP on him, but she couldn't shake him off. She reckoned that when she went to the toilet, He would squat outside the toilet and wait for her. Chapter 2566. What is the Grand Duke's shame? No matter how she humiliates him, she has to be his substitute. There is no such thing as shame. Wei Wei Bai coldly stared at Xia, trying to struggle once more. But she tried to snatch her finger back. Xia was indifferent, allowing her to struggle. The strength of his finger did not change at all, making her struggle as hard as candy. In the end, her finger turned red. Xia furrowed his eyebrows in distress and pressed her finger to his lips. Does it hurt? Take a break and struggle again later, okay? His infuriating tone was sweet and sticky to the point that it gave people goosebumps. He even licked the back of her hand. He said it was for her treatment. Wei Wei Bai, defeated. Xia's face improved too quickly, and for a moment, she was overtaken by him. Wei Wei Bai coldly turned her face away, not saying a word. Xia's eyes dimmed, but the smile on his mouth did not change. She was beside him. A dead person can't compete with him. So as long as he waited, she could only look at him for a long time. Whether it was hate or love, her eyes and heart were all about him, so he had successfully entered her heart. Xia suppressed his impatience. He didn't want to scare her anymore. After all, at the wedding, the only good impression she had was completely erased. She was very afraid of him now. He couldn't control himself from touching her. He could only try to endure and love her elsewhere. Can't scare her again. Xia lowered his eyes and bitterly smiled, and then slightly released her finger to make her red fingertips feel better. Wei Wei Bai seemed a little surprised, glancing sideways at him. Xia's heart trembled, and his fingers loosened even more. Compared to the 10 fingers tightly clasped just now, now they were only loosely clasped, as if they could let go at any time. Wei Wei Bai's tightly pursed lips also relaxed a bit. The atmosphere between the two people was finally not so hostile. Only then did the rest of the people dare to approach him. They cautiously and respectfully said, "Your Excellency, can you call the price for the first item of tonight's banquet auction?" The first bid. There would be no competition. This was the privilege of the nobles with the highest status present. Generally speaking, one would shout the lowest price. The first item was a gift for the person with the highest status. Xia gazed deeply at the girl beside him. The deep affection in his eyes was not concealed. The resentment in his heart vanished into nothingness as a wisp of a helpless smile appeared on the corners of his mouth, and it was filled with a sense of pampering. "No, let my wife bid." The first auction item was usually not too bad. Most of them were jewels or magic items. If it was up to Wei Wei Bai to bid, it would have been a magic item that was meant for the Duke. Immediately go and exchange for the highest quality jewelry. Everyone finally saw it clearly. Grand Duke Xia was enlightened. How was this doting on his wife? This was worshipping his ancestors. He didn't see that careful fawning look. She had never seen the Duke of the Empire Rose so humble and gentle. It made people wonder if it was snowing outside. It was spring and the animals were going to be cold. It was normal for the aristocratic circle to sail according to the wind. Just now, they were chattering nonsense about the Duchess. Now they were pulling the chair and adjusting the temperature, fearing that the Duchess would be hot or cold. Her sickly body was not suitable for standing for a long time. Even the ballroom dance was not performed. Everyone gathered in a circle to flatter and curry favor with this mysterious, weak girl.
T.
Chapter 2567. A girl with half of her face covered was sitting on a luxurious and beautiful red brocade chair, holding a glass of fresh fruit juice in her hand. In front of her was an earl playing the piano. The earl's famous social butterfly was dancing. There was also a middle-aged artist who was said to be a soprano singing loudly. Wei Wei Bai lowered her eyes and took a sip of fruit juice indifferently. Xia held the wine glass, leaning lazily and elegantly beside her, not looking at the others singing or dancing. He just stared at her. Wei Wei Bai was speechless. Is this guy a surveillance camera? He won't relax for even a minute. She seemed to be interested in the piano, but she was actually discussing with the system how to leave this place. This person is too weak. Even if she kicked him in the face and shouted that she did not love him, substitute Xia's sidebar would not increase. She had no choice but to dig the grave of the white moonlight to provoke him. Otherwise, if she shouted that she loved the white moonlight every day, not only would it not hurt Xia, she felt that the white moonlight was too cheap. The system said, "Invisible person potion. This thing will turn you into a passerby, without any sense of existence, 100 health points." Wei Bai said, "Expensive." The system said, "That is the science long-live potion. After drinking it, any magic, supernatural, or monster will automatically lose effect. Long-live science." Wei Bai said, "How much?" The system said, 85% off." Wei Bai said, "Expensive." The system said, "There is nothing cheaper." Wei Bai said, "Xia Mosquito, this wastrel, will die a horrible death." The system said, "Buy or not." Wei Bai hesitated. "Wait a while more. Maybe there will be a sudden big discount." The system had to turn on the discount notification. "Then I will observe the discount time in the supermarket." Wei Bai was even more depressed, and her eyes were staring at the piano for a long time, but she did not realize it. Until the atmosphere became quiet again. She then realized that the environment was not right. Everyone had their heads down, their faces pale. The most pitiful one was the Earl playing the piano. The title of Count was neither too big nor too small, but it was also a very good title. But in this banquet, he could only be considered a small character. When he started to play, he noticed that the Duchess's eyes were fixed on him. He was very happy, thinking that he was going to be promoted and make a fortune. In the end, she only stared at him for a second. In the next minute, he felt that his title was over. 2 minutes later, he thought he was going to die. 3 minutes. The tragic scene of his entire clan being wiped out was right before his eyes. His hands trembled, his body trembled, and in the end, under the Duke's murderous gaze, his legs went soft, and he sat on the ground. Everyone knew that the Duke had just returned. So, he specially led the guards and killed all the impostors who pretended to be members of the Church of Light at the border. How many people were scared out of their wits by his illustrious name? Otherwise, why would the royal family not even dare to fart when the saint went missing? Blood rained down as the royal family was in turmoil. All the nobles were in a state of panic, afraid that they would not be able to serve the Rose Duchess well. They were all going to become victims of the power struggle. The Count said, "Madam, don't look at me. I have many lovers, but I am innocent with you." Wei Bai had been chatting with the system for too long, and only now did she realize that she was staring at the wrong place. A hand was placed on her waist forcefully, so strong that it made it difficult for her to breathe. Xia was like a venomous snake without a bone. His cold eyes were filled with blood-red hostility. He leaned on her shoulder, his lips holding the tip of her ear, and asked with a cold smile, "Do you like that piano very much, or do you like the person playing it?" Chapter 2568. Wei Bai was stunned and looked at him blankly. She didn't seem to know what he was asking. Through the black gauze, behind the hazy gauze, her beautiful and clear eyes were actually a little moist. Finally, she sighed softly. "No, I just suddenly remembered that Xia used to play the piano for me. He knows that I like to listen to it." Just as she said this sentence, she suddenly thought of something and shut her mouth. Then, she looked at him with fear in her eyes. She was afraid that he would explode again. The cold smile on Xia's face froze. That Xia wasn't him. The jealousy in his heart was like a venomous snake that wanted to bite. But when he saw her increasingly pale and listless face, all his vicious feelings were suppressed. Xia gently held her fragile fingers. Her dress was very conservative. He was the one who chose it. But she kept her fingers tucked in her sleeves, and her ankles were definitely not exposed. Her defensive and fearful look was also what he gave her. Especially when the marks on her body had not faded, she was very afraid of meeting people. Today, she came out with him to meet so many people. It was hard for her to think of all sorts of ways to escape. Shaya had caught so many criminals. How could he not know what she was thinking? He couldn't bear to be angry with her. Shaya used all his strength to suppress his discomfort. Then his voice became gentle. If you like it, I can play it for you. By Weiwei, you're used to being a substitute, right? You can join in the fun too. She hit him with a serious face. I like Shaya's the one who plays it, not yours. No matter how thick Shaya's skin was, he was still hit. His cold and scary eyes were surrounded by broken emotions and became weak in an instant. The surrounding nobles who heard this automatically took a few steps back. They couldn't believe what they had heard. The Duke was a substitute, and he was despised? The Duchess openly cheated, but the Duke was only sad but not angry. Wow, this gossip was too explosive. Everyone was worried that they would be silenced. Shaya suddenly waved his hand, and everyone immediately left respectfully, scrambling to be the first to leave. This was a small hall, so it was very private. The ingratiates left and closed the door behind them. Just like that, a private space was created. The light in Shaya's eyes shattered. He lowered his eyes and said with a wry smile, Weiwei, do you hate everything I have given you so much? A noble status, a luxurious castle, and the highest level of luxury. Also, when they were outside, everyone would fawn over them. She didn't care at all. However, this was all that his world could give her. He wanted to give her affection, but she didn't want it. He gave her the status and wealth, but she didn't want it. What else could he give her? He was even willing to pretend to be a stunt double and was willing to learn, but she said that he was not worthy. Even the Rose Duchess, who was close to death, was as powerless as a child at this moment. Weiwei Bai stared at him silently. She seemed to be tempted and reached out to touch his face. But in the next second, her finger trembled and she retracted it. Shaya's eyes lit up with hope. The young girl had already shrunk back somewhat at a loss, as if she did not understand her own actions. Behind Shaya's weak and pitiful eyes was a sharp and crazy desire to attack. It was rare to see her soften her heart. How could he let go of this opportunity? But before he could reach out to hug her, he heard her whisper, Can you play the piano for me? Shaya was silent for a moment, his eyes dark, and then he revealed a brilliant smile. Of course. Chapter 2569. Even if he had to play the piano as a substitute, he would still be happy. Shaya's face was cold when he turned around, but when he touched the piano, he pretended to smile flawlessly. His fingers quickly fell on the keys. The crisp sound of the piano was full of murderous intent. Weiwei Bai gently took off the net on her head. She rested her chin on her hands and looked at him quietly. Shaya's fingers became lighter and lighter. Finally, the piano sound became gentle. His side profile was exquisite and beautiful like a flower. Her rare calm gaze made his eyes soften. The music lingered. He held the keys with his fingertips. It was rare for him to start to focus. The girl suddenly got up and came behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist and rested her face on his back. She whispered, Sorry, you're not him, but I made you play the piano. Shaya's eyes were sour. He pursed his lips and finally spoke in a light tone. Treat me as him, Weiwei. Weiwei Bai's fingers holding him stiffened for a long time. Then she said gently, You don't deserve it. After he finished speaking, a sharp needle pierced into his waist. Shaya had never been so careless. Maybe it was her rare gentleness, or maybe it was because he was too confident in himself. She couldn't have dangerous items on her. Shaya's eyes widened. His body stiffened, and his limbs went numb. Weiwei Bai left him expressionlessly. She watched him fall to the ground and couldn't move. 5 days of life value of a nerve anesthetic needle was effective. She was like a proud goddess of vengeance. Her cold eyes were filled with suppressed anger. The only person I love is him. Since I resurrected you, my medicine must be effective. I don't need a substitute because I can resurrect my true lover. With that, she turned to leave. But in the next second, Shaya's struggling fingers grabbed the corner of her skirt. Don't you have any feelings for me? It was unimaginable for a man to be so lowly. Weiwei Bai's footsteps paused. She was silent for a long time before she calmly reached out and plucked the only rose on top of her head and threw it at him. The broken petals fell onto his eyes. He was in so much pain. Wei Wei Bai's voice was cold and emotionless. I just misplaced my feelings. You are not him, and you will never be. So stop pretending. Xiao's fingertips were weak. He lay on the ground and looked up at her. The despair in his eyes made one's heart palpitate. Wei Wei Bai watched as the stand-in bar struggled to move up to 65. She hardened her heart and said, "True love doesn't allow a substitute. So, wake up. Substitutes don't have good endings." No one cared about the substitute. The substitute was so miserable that even she, who had a heart of stone, could not bear to see it. What was the point of being a substitute? She could just get into a proper relationship and complete her mission. Due to the drug, Shea's fingers gradually lost their strength. His fingertips fell to the ground, but his eyes were still staring at her. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were indifferent. There was a hint of panic in them, but more than that, there was determination. I don't want to see you again. Don't come looking for me. You have such good qualities. More girls will like you. The frailty, grievance, and pity in Xiao's eyes disappeared. His purple eyes were terrifyingly beautiful. He just stared at her coldly. Don't go. His voice was hoarse and suppressed, but it did not sound humble. Instead, it sounded like an order. Wei Wei Bai tugged at her skirt and took a few steps back without hesitation. Then, she gripped her skirt and hardened her heart. She immediately turned around and ran out. The door opened and closed. During this time, she did not even look at him. Xiao lay on the ground, as if waiting for something. The lonely youth's eyes were numb and frozen. The candlelight flickered and finally woke up this frozen world. The youth, lying on the ground, slowly got up. He reached out and pulled out the needle on his waist. The tip of the needle was black. It was a highly toxic drug. If he was a normal person, he would have been poisoned to death. She really didn't have even half a bit of affection for him. Xiaya was expressionless. He reached out and combed his short, honey-colored fluffy hair. The needle on his finger shattered into dust. His current body was useless against any poison. After all, dragons were famous for not being afraid of poison. She didn't know about this matter. Xiaya held his face with both hands. He seemed a little tired. His eyelids were drooping and he looked lazy. Resurrect my lover? He revealed a ruthless and strange smile. What a good wish. It seems that you have never really given up hope. How can you still be so naive? He was so gentle to her. She still had the desire to return to her lover's side. Xiaya reached out and put his hand on the piano. He elegantly got up. Then, he straightened his sleeves and collar and slowly chased after her. Behind him, the piano collapsed with a loud bang. Download. Chapter 2570. Wei Wei Bai held the shovel and chanted the exorcism mantra while digging the grave. It was just for show. After all, Xiao's poison was cured right after she left. The stand-in bar also increased to 80. She thought it was so exciting that Big Mosquito Xia knew that a stand-in would not have a good ending. Being a substitute meant being abused by others. So he finally started to think seriously about not being a stand-in. Looking at the 80 bar, Wei Wei Bai steeled herself and dug the grave with the shovel. After digging out Xia Yueguang's skeleton, she wanted to let Xia, who was following behind her, see her determination. Then she would give up on being a stand-in. Wei Wei Bai said to the system, "Are you sure Xia Mosquito is following behind me?" The system held the system telescope and scanned everywhere. It could barely see an elegant and slender figure in the dark night, quietly and coldly hiding in the dark. It was a little far away, so it could still see. But it could not see his face, so it did not know how he was feeling. The system said, "Yes, you can go out so smoothly because of him." Otherwise, how could she just walk out without anyone stopping her? Wei Wei Bai muttered, 5 days of life points wasted. I should have just made some croton. It won't kill him anyway. Xia Mosquito's body was godly. Because he ate his dragon frame. If he was not willing, forget about needles. Knives, guns, fire, and water could not hurt him. He was even immune to magic and poison. With the protection of the dragon power, he was almost like a god. Wei Wei Bai had already thought about this when she was inserting the needles, but she still took the risk and tried. After all, she only wanted the determination to hate him. It was not like she really wanted to die with him. Wei Wei Bai dug and asked, "Xiao Mosquito didn't leave, right?" The system said, "No. Do you have some scary plot? Why do you keep asking if he's here?" Wei Wei Bai's fingers trembled, and her face became gloomy. "I'm scared of ghosts. What if a ghost crawls out of the grave while we're digging halfway? I'll feel better with someone following me." People who are afraid of the dark and ghosts, if there is a living person by their side, that would eliminate most of the fear. In the middle of the night, digging a grave in the dark of a cemetery, she would also be afraid. Hearing that Xiao Mosquito was behind her, she was relieved. The system looked at the young man standing quietly in the dark through the binoculars. His strange and beautiful purple eyes were so dark that they were almost black. His strange temperament gave off an extremely dangerous feeling. The system felt that the male lead was scarier than a ghost. He was afraid that the host would go overboard. However, every time the host tries to attack, he would always be on the verge of going overboard. He didn't see her play herself to death either. Therefore, the system continued to eat the soup dumpling silently. Recently, he had a little extra money in his little treasury. He could finally reward himself with something good to eat. Moreover, there was no need to worry about the host running out of HP. Anyway, when she returned to reality, there was a pool of super infinite HP for her to scoop up. Didn't you see that the host was generous with her HP? However, they might be the first pair in history to have to rely on other people to gain HP. Other people were rich and noble when they were attacking. It was definitely the first time someone had seen someone begging like them in such a situation. Thinking about it made him feel a little sad. The system chewed on the soup dumplings and shed 2 lines of bitter tears. Damn it, it was really too delicious. Chapter 2571. It's 10,000 times better than discounted snacks. Wei Wei Bai finally dug to the coffin. The sound of the shovel hitting the coffin was soul-stirring. In the silent graveyard, the petite figure used all her strength to dig out the soil 1 spoonful at a time. Suddenly, she paused. She seemed to be hesitating. Standing at the entrance of the graveyard, leaning against a bunch of wild roses, the Duke calmly lowered his head and drank a mouthful of wine. When he followed her out, he took a small bottle of liquor from the table. He drank expressionlessly. His dark purple eyes were dark and gloomy, without a trace of light. It was very frightening. Her trembling breath came from the air. She was trembling. Was it sadness? Xiao leaned against the flowers. A trace of cold hostility flashed in his eyes. Those wild roses began to break little by little under his cold breath. Wei Wei Bai trembled. "I'm going to open the coffin. It's so scary. Will I suddenly turn into a zombie?" The system said, "Don't be afraid. I'll buy you some garlic to subdue the monsters." Wei Wei Bai said, "I regret it. Xiao Mosquito, come and stop me." Every time she regretted it, the level bar of the side quest increased again. 85. She felt that if she worked hard, she could directly reach 100. The perfect and sweet follow-up strategy was waiting for her. She was really fed up with the warmth of the farming world turning into a dark mess of a horror movie scene. It was very tiring to abuse people. Couldn't they let her be sweet for a while? Wei Wei Bai hardened her heart. She used the shovel to pry open a gap in the coffin, counting 1, 2, 3. She used force. She opened a gap. Wei Wei Bai shuddered. She felt that the atmosphere in the graveyard was even colder. She took a deep breath and tried prying again. Her whole body was about to hang on the coffin. Finally, the dark inside of the coffin was exposed. Wei Wei Bai, seeing Xiao Mosquito's skeleton, although it was scary, she still felt that it was quite handsome. But why did she feel so disgusted when she saw other people's skeletons? This strange thought flashed through Wei Wei Bai's mind. However, the idea that came out of nowhere was not enough for her to think too deeply. Wei Wei Bai threw away the shovel and took a deep breath, intending to drag the skeleton out. Behind him was the target of the strategy guide. If she didn't put on a good show, she wouldn't be able to explain herself. She rolled up her sleeves and tried to resist the urge to poke her head out to look, only to find that the coffin was gone. Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief, but it was stuck in her throat again. The disappearing coffin, the eerie graveyard.
It was so scary.
She turned around stiffly, only to see the coffin placed quietly in an open space not far away. He really wanted to break into a run. But in the next second, a lazy figure sat on top of the half-open coffin. The young man stared at her with gloomy eyes, one of his legs hanging casually under the coffin. He was holding a small flat-shaped wine bottle between his fingers and was almost done drinking. Shaya's eyelids were half-closed, his thick eyelashes almost hiding his deep eyes. He was like a heavily injured giant beast that was hiding in the darkness, full of hostility. Magic elements were faintly rioting around the beautiful young man, and golden magics were fluttering around him. His voice was hoarse and calm. "Congratulations on finding your lover, Wei Wei. When did she find out the location of this man's grave?" Shaya combed through it from the beginning, but still couldn't figure it out. She was clearly such a fragile and pure person, but she always seemed to be under his control, giving him a hard slap. The poison needle that shouldn't have appeared, and the information about this graveyard. Chapter 2572. Shaya's eyes were extremely cold, but his thin red lips curved into a smile. "Do you need me to help you resurrect him?" Wei Bai gripped the corner of her skirt tightly and stared at him. She seemed to want to come over, but she thought of something and could only stand there stiffly. Shaya stretched out his finger, and a magic light appeared. It illuminated his beautiful but emotionless face. He was like the cruel and ruthless Bloody Duke in the legends, finally revealing his coldest personality. The boy who had always been gentle to her. He no longer had that kind of patience. Under his numb and cold expression, there was no way out of despair. No matter how he retreated, how he pretended, how he imitated the man in her heart, she would not love him. Then what was he pretending for? He was never gentle, disdained to play the piano, and didn't like to pretend to be pitiful and sweet talk. This was all done by that idiot little baron. When did he ever need to be so lowly? Sides stand in progress. 90. Wei Bai originally felt that the atmosphere was a bit bad and wanted to say a few words of comfort. But when she heard the side quest prompt, she immediately had the courage to say harsh words. She slowly took a few steps forward. Her eyes were a bit red, but there was no trace of cowardice. "Shaya, I won't fall in love with you just because you look like him." The light on Shaya's fingertips trembled. The girl's firm voice had a trace of soft sweetness in the dark night, but it was cruel to the bone. "Do you know? I fell in love with Shaya because he was unique. Even if he died, I will never fall in love with another person like him." Speaking of this, she smiled bitterly. "Because when I see someone like him, it will only remind me that he is dead. I don't even have time to feel pain, so how can I have the mood to love a stand-in?" Cruel words, but inconceivably gentle. "So don't be a stand-in and don't love me." Shaya West should be proud and not so lowly. Under the dim light, the girl's expression was firm and gentle, and even had a lively and flirtatious look that was not usually there. Her face was covered in mud, her delicate hair was in a mess, and her roses and jewelry were lost. She was obviously in such a sorry state. Shaya stared at her blankly for a long time. His face was very pale, and his eyes were red with hostility. The light on his fingertips was actually an offensive spell. Looking at Baron Shaya's corpse, he smiled. He wanted to take revenge on her. He wanted to make her suffer and despair. He wanted to destroy this corpse so that she could not resurrect the little baron. But when he saw her seriously and diligently advising him not to be humble, he couldn't help it. The light on Shaya's fingertips finally went out. In the darkness, his neck drooped dispiritedly, and his hair fell messily under his eyes. Wei Bai hesitated for a moment before walking forward step by step. She came to the coffin, as if she wanted to see the man in the coffin. Sitting beside the coffin, The young man looked like a stray dog. Suddenly, he asked in a low and hoarse voice, "If I didn't act as a substitute in the beginning and used my own identity to pursue you, would you not be so resistant?" He might have been wrong from the start. She had been trying her best to imitate the person she loved. It would only serve to remind her even more. The one she loved was the little baron, not him. Wei Bai reached out to touch the coffin and paused. She hesitated for a long time before looking sideways at him. Her light-colored eyes were clear and without resentment. "You are very good, maybe. Crossover system. Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.
Sashu.
Download Transmigration system. Adonis, come here and read this on your phone. https://m. Sashu. com//. Chapter 2573. Just as she was about to say the answer, a voice came out of her mouth. Suddenly, a creaking sound came from the graveyard. Wei Bai then saw a white skeletal hand land on the edge of the coffin with a clatter. The bones were deeply imprinted on the rotten wood. An extremely cold corpse aura rushed towards her. Shaya almost reflexively jumped down from the coffin, grabbed her waist with one hand, and pulled her into his arms. Then, a light appeared on his fingertips, blocking the corpse's death aura. He was just about to smash the corpse in the coffin, but he thought of something. He looked down at the little witch in his arms and clenched his teeth and gave up. At this moment, a violent rumbling sound came from the ground. All the corpses came back to life. They crawled out of the ground and let out terrifying howls. The undead moved in groups. Someone was controlling it. Shaya frowned and looked at the sky. Sure enough, he saw the dark barrier. He didn't notice it just now because it was covered by the death aura in the graveyard. Moreover, this kind of large-scale magic array could only be made by burning one's soul. The death aura of the corpses was contagious. Once these corpses crawled out, a plague would soon spread throughout the entire capital. The undead corpses would join the army of the dead. The final result would be the undead running amok, sweeping across the entire continent. This was the most hated magic array of all light mages. Arrogant and crazy laughter came from the sky. "Shaya West, I want you dead." Wei Bai looked up and saw a half-rotten skeleton in the sky. Half of the face was rotten, and the remaining face was a little familiar. Wasn't that the Holy Sun? Peg Rel floated in the air and raised his scepter ferociously. "Do you know, to deal with you, I even took out the royal family's treasure, the magic old scepter. I don't believe that I can't kill you with the combined power of the royal family." Wei Bai asked the system, "What's wrong with this guy? Why did he suddenly turn black like this?" Even his face was ruined. Did the people in this plane have a habit of suddenly turning black? The system flipped through the information. He was casually sent to the barren land by the male lead and was caught by the Lich as an experimental subject. His body was destroyed, his soul was contaminated, and he was basically in a state of waiting for death. That's why he desperately wanted to come back for revenge. Wei Bai expressed her understanding. Even if her face was disfigured like this, she would still want revenge. Shaya glanced at the little baron who was struggling to get out of the coffin. Sir Foam extended his hand and spread his fingers. A golden, polygonal magic array then appeared, transforming into a golden rope that bound the struggling corpse. Then, a space crack swallowed the small baron. Then he reached out and touched the little witch's hair. He lowered his head and kissed her. "What you want, I'll keep it for you." The girl in his arms trembled, her fingers clutching the front of his clothes as if she couldn't believe it. You don't have to do this. Let go of me and run for your life." Shaya's eyes were deep, and a trace of treacherous darkness flashed through them. But he didn't show the slightest bit of emotion. Instead, he sneered and said, "How can I let go of you? If I die today, you will die with me." In any case, she didn't like substitutes. He didn't want to be one. The real Rose Duchess was not only not gentle, she was also very vicious, fickle, and full of schemes. All the dead skeletons stretched out their terrifying hands, wanting to hug Shaya. Pegrel, who was in the air, shouted, "With my flesh and blood as a sacrifice, evil god who spreads death, please grant me the power to destroy the living." Teak. Chapter 2574. The darkness in the sky turned into a huge whirlpool, and an incomparably huge bony palm grabbed Pegrel. It completely crushed him and swallowed him. Pegrel was still laughing before he died. "You're dead, Shaya. No one can stop the evil god from descending." Shaya's eyes turned cold. It was indeed troublesome. A huge suction force appeared from the huge bony palm, holding all the dead people and absorbing them. The dark energy that could destroy heaven and earth rushed towards Shaya. Shaya made a decision almost instantly. The golden cage completely turned into a beautiful circular barrier, and he put her inside. The barrier was even covered with rose petals. Shaya stood outside the barrier, revealing a lazy and gorgeous smile. "Do you know? This is a barrier that I condensed with my power to protect you, and also to lock you up. Originally, I thought that since you were so disobedient and destroyed your hope, I would lock you up here." He looked at her incredulous eyes and sighed with a smile. "Unfortunately, I can't bear to see you unhappy." What he couldn't bear to see the most was the warm love and treatment she gave him when they first met. This was the reason why he wanted to be a substitute. It was as if she would always love him as long as he was the little baron in her heart. She would sit on his thigh again, gently hug him, and say that she liked him. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. He reached out and touched the golden barrier, looking at the cute girl he treasured inside. Behind them was a sky full of darkness, a terrifying doomsday scene of the evil god descending. Her hands were helplessly pressed on the barrier, and below her was soft silk and petals. It was like heaven and hell. A golden barrier completely separated them into two worlds. Shaya touched her face through the barrier, his eyes gentle. "If I die, will you like me a little?" Wei Bai's nails firmly grasped the barrier, but no matter how hard she tried, it was a soft barrier that couldn't be broken. The tears in her eyes overflowed, as if she wanted to say something, but she was choked with sobs. Shaya quietly lowered his eyes. Under his thick eyelashes, his purple eyes were incomparably gentle. "Then I'll be leaving." After that, he turned around and slowly walked towards the center of the dark vortex. His slender figure and elegant noble attire were blown by the wind, and the roses in his chest pocket scattered. Shaya pulled out the silver chain. In the brand new pocket watch, there was a drawing of her smiling adorably. Then he put the arms back into his pocket and disappeared. When he reappeared, the slender and beautiful young man was already standing in the middle of the white bone palm. Large-scale golden magic formations appeared layer by layer, creating an extremely gorgeous world of light, darkness, and light, storms and turbulence. Countless rays of light and dazzling magical elements shattered. With all the power of the royal family as a sacrifice, the evil god that was summoned was so terrifying that it made people despair. If Shaya fails, darkness would descend and rule this continent. Bai Weiwei's face was deathly pale as she lay on top of the golden barrier, looking up at the tragic battle. Her lips trembled as she kept calling out in a low voice, "Shaya, Sha." Finally, she didn't call him Little Baron. They were really calling out to him. Light began to appear, and the darkness gradually disappeared. The huge palm broke apart little by little. A young man covered in blood appeared outside the barrier. He squatted outside the barrier, looking casual and indifferent. "Why, do you really believe that I will lose?" Wei Bai looked up at him, her eyes bloodshot from exhaustion. Then, she cursed in a hoarse voice, "I'm afraid that the entire continent will be killed by the evil god, so I don't care about your life or death." She cursed and scolded, crying her eyes out. Shaya smiled helplessly, waved his hand to undo the barrier, and then reached out to hug her. A huge finger bone suddenly rushed out from the ground and was about to penetrate Wei Bai's body. The next moment, she was in Shaya's arms. He asked in a low voice, "Are you okay?" Wei Wei Bai shook her head in shock. She looked up and was about to say something, but her voice was choked. Blood covered her body, and the young man who was hugging her had his chest pierced by a white finger bone. To facilitate the next reading, you can click on comma. Chapter 2575. The darkness faded, and the pale dawn came. All the mages in the capital, whether they were enemies or allies, instantly knew that a huge battle had happened here. Including the gradually disappearing evil god's aura, it was horrifying. Death and redemption came from a night of battle. Countless mages flew over from the sky. They gathered at the cemetery at the bottom level of the Rose family. Countless corpses were broken and scattered on the overturned ground. The aura of the great holy mages array made every mage here tremble and excited. This was the aura of the Rose Duke, Shiabist. The descent of the evil god was a terrible thing. It was a dark array made of the soul of the royal family, the scepter of the royal family, and a large number of corpses of the Rose family. There was an ominous and disgusting element in the aura. The Archbishop of the Church of Light slowly reached out and pressed the ground. Although the disgusting aura began to dissipate, but the black gas still had the effect of corroding the skin. The Archbishop stretched out his old finger, and there was actually rotten skin on it. Under his white hood, his old and calm face showed a trace of intense distortion. It's the evil god of plague. Everyone's expression changed drastically. The Archbishop's tone was a little unstable. If it had successfully descended last night, then we couldn't have stopped the fall of the entire continent. Once the plague spread, there was no way to stop it. At that time, the people who died would become the new dead and bring great power to the evil god. The Archbishop's voice was trembling. It was the Duke who stopped everything. The rest of the mages were touched. The only great holy mage. Everyone knew that he was very powerful. But to be so powerful to such a terrifying extent, it was close to the power of God. But what about the Rose Duke? The Archbishop glanced at the fresh blood on the ground. He frowned. He should be seriously injured. After all, the royal family has shed all pretense of cordiality now. They must know that the Duke is injured and are looking for him. The royal family was desperate, sacrificing the soul of a royal prince and the magic power of the royal family. Once it failed, then they would definitely do their best to counterattack and kill the injured Shiabist. The Archbishop said coldly, "Everyone listen to orders. Join forces with the Rose family to suppress the royal family and, when necessary, overthrow the royal family." There was no way out. The current situation was life and death. Since they were on the Rose family side, they could only wait for death if they did not overthrow the royal family. When the Duke was seriously injured, he couldn't allow the situation to turn around. After all, they were waiting for the Duke to ascend the throne. It had been a long time. As for where the Duke went, his spatial magic and life magic were so powerful. As long as he wasn't dead, there was no need to worry about him. There was a lot of commotion outside. Wei Wei Bai didn't know. He didn't ask the system either, because there was a more important problem waiting for her to solve. What should she do if the male lead turns into a dragon? She obediently crouched in a small corner behind a pile of gold coins, hugging her knees with both hands with a dull expression. The system said, "It's coming, it's coming, it's coming." Wei Wei Bai immediately put all the gold coins on her body. Then he curled up and held his breath. The sound of falling gold coins sounded like a rainstorm. There were all kinds of jewels, golden coins, and a huge amount of wealth in the huge underground castle. A silver giant dragon with a little blood flower on its chest, its gorgeous purple eyes were filled with confusion and greed. At https://www.
Sashu.
com/ full text at https://www.
Sashu.
com/ download text at https://www.
Sashu. Com.
at https://m Sashu.
Com.
Chapter 2576. He stretched out his claws everywhere and carefully lifted the gold coins. The ice-cold silver scales scraped the mountain of gold coins. Among the countless wealth, he was sniffing, carefully looking for his little Rose. Because of the dragonization caused by the serious injury and near death, at the last moment, Shaya turned into a giant dragon and lost his memory and reason. Only the instinct of greed and desire drove him. The moment he woke up, a beautiful girl was reflected in his huge eyes. His empty mind and heart were instantly filled with a terrible plunder and greedy love. A beautiful child who is more beautiful than countless gold, silver, and jewels. More dazzling than the most dazzling thing in the world. He wants her. Then he stretched out his huge claws and tried to grab her. Countless treasures were crushed by this attack. The girl hurriedly dodged. Then he saw the little girl run away, seemingly afraid of him. The giant dragon innocently looked at his claws. Oh, she is too small, too cute, and too fragile. If he really caught her just now, he would have pinched her to death. So the beautiful silver dragon carefully stretched out his two strong claws and gently turned over his girl in the mountain of gold and silver. He still doesn't know how to call people. He just feels itchy on his chest, licking his saliva with his claws and touching it is almost fine. And from Wei Wei Bai's perspective, looking at the heart pierced by the white bone, thinking that the main mission is over. The boy holding her forcibly propped up his body and whispered, "I can't put you here. Others will find this place and hurt you." After saying that, he desperately reached out and grabbed the white bone finger on his chest and forcibly pulled out the hand bone. The blood on his chest splashed onto Wei Wei Bai's skirt. She looked at him dumbfounded. Xiao was already at the end of the road, directly splitting open a space crack and directly falling into this huge land of wealth. Countless gold coins buried them. Wei Wei Bai didn't suffer any injuries because the boy was holding her tightly from beginning to end. He would bear all the brunt of the impact himself. When Wei Wei Bai crawled out of his arms and pulled him out of the gold coin, his breath was already weak, and his heartbeat was almost inaudible. Wei Wei Bai actually had a conspiracy theory with the system. This guy wouldn't fall for it, right? But seeing their target in such a miserable state, they couldn't help but feel a chill down their spine. Not to mention the ruse of self-injury. It was really the ruse of self-injury. He was really risking his life. He was really going to die. Just as Wei Wei Bai was about to reluctantly take out over 100 HP to save his life, however, he discovered that silver scales had begun to appear on Xiao's body. At first, it was fine, covering the white skin. Later on, it became bigger and bigger, bigger and bigger. Then, she realized that it wasn't his scales that were growing, but his entire body. In the end, the dying youth grew silver scales, claws, and huge dragon wings. The bright and clean giant dragon lay on top of the golden treasure, sleeping peacefully. Wei Wei Bai flipped through the information with the system for a long time. Only then did he barely know what Shaya had done in the land of the Holy Dragon. That was why his body was filled with dragon magic. As for what he had done, the information was incomplete. She finally knew that in the system's database, there was less and less information about the target. Wei Wei Bai couldn't ask the system why it was like this. After all, what kind of relationship did she have with the system? If there wasn't a real problem, how could the system not give her the information? // Chapter 2577. It must be because they were too poor. They couldn't afford to repair the instruments in the various system libraries, which caused the instruments to malfunction everywhere. For example, that damn branch button that couldn't automatically choose whether to use it or not. There was also a pending time. So it didn't seem so unbearable to have one more missing data. So it was speculated that the target went to the dragon race to get power, and then before he died, he activated the characteristics of a dragon, causing him to become a dragon. Wei Wei Bai thought that she would wait for Xiao to wake up and then think of a way to change back. The branch had already soared to 95. This data was as exciting as taking drugs. So as long as he woke up and refreshed the substitute branch, there was basically nothing to worry about in this plane. However, the youth who had turned into a dragon suddenly opened his eyes. In the huge dragon eyes, there was no trace of wisdom, only endless confusion and beastly nature. And that unhesitant claw attack that was sure to kill. Just a little bit more, and Wei Wei Bai would have died. Xiaya, who had turned into a dragon, didn't recognize her and wanted to kill her. Wei Wei Bai had no choice but to escape and hide first. Thinking of those hungry beasts that had lost their minds, they were definitely looking for food to eat now. The entire underground castle was full of gold and silver treasures. Apart from her, there was nothing else that could be food. Wei Wei Bai hugged the gold coins and tried to suppress the rhythm of her breathing pitifully, waiting for the giant dragon to walk past from the side, dragging its dragon tail. The sound of claws and smooth membrane wings brushing past the gold coins was extremely terrifying. He smelled everywhere. That sweet, almost undetectable smell made him unusually irritable. He only had one thought in his mind. This was his treasure, the most precious treasure. He couldn't let her run away. The dragon walked over angrily. Wei Wei Bai finally breathed a sigh of relief. She reached out and gently pushed aside the gold coins, worried that she would be drowned by the gold coins and suffocate to death. At first, the shock of seeing so much wealth accumulated into a mountain range was already aesthetic fatigue. Wei Wei Bai looked left and right. There was no person, no dragon. She carefully moved her body, trying not to make a sound as she walked out, planning to get away from here first. She didn't have the athletic nerves to escape another claw. However, as soon as he took a step forward, a strange aura appeared behind him. It was warm and fragrant. The gorgeous aura was like a blooming rose. She suddenly turned around. The giant silver dragon was lying on the mountain of gold coins. Its elegant dragon neck stretched out, and its cold, hard, and unusually delicate dragon face was right in front of her. His beautiful claws were connected to his membranous wings, and his huge wings were carefully folded. His purple eyes were as clear as amethysts, clearly reflecting her figure. Wei Wei Bai stared at him with wide eyes. She wanted to see if he was going to braise her or eat her raw, but there was no expression on the dragon face. Wei Wei Bai moved her lips and finally called out in a low voice, "Xiaya?" The dragon moved his neck and tilted his head to look at her in confusion. Then he stretched out his claws. Wei Wei Bai was in despair. Was she going to be buried in the dragon's mouth? It was beyond her imagination that the god of this plane would turn out like this. How could a good strategy target be defeated when it turned into a dragon? Being his food was not enough to fill the gaps between his teeth. Wei Wei Bai thought that since she was going to die, it didn't matter if she was scared or not. She suddenly took a step forward, stretched out her hand, and hugged his dragon horn. The dragon was too big, but because his neck was hanging down, his head was just in front of her. She stood on tiptoe and just reached out to hug his silver horn. Chapter 2578. This way, when the dragon claws want to pinch her to death, it will hit its own dragon face. To survive, it is best to climb onto the dragon. However, there is not enough time and she also needs climbing skills, so she hugs the dragon horn and makes do. The huge dragon claw has already arrived above her head. The wind brought by the claw blew down the gold coins and fell on the two of them. The purple dragon eyes stared at the girl in front of him, who was lying on the side of his face and holding his horn with both hands. He found that although he slowed down his strength, it still caused objective destruction. He retracted his claws and obediently curled them up, motionless, and letting her hold him. Xiaoya's breath was hot, and there was a trace of soft pleasure in his eyes. Wei Wei Bai held him for a while in fear. She found that the dragon was obediently squatting and letting her hold him. Not eating her? Wei Wei Bai carefully let go of his horn and found that the silver dragon was just staring at her curiously. She slowly moved her body back. However, before she could walk out of the range, two dragon claws appeared in front of her and folded together, forming a dragon claw wall. She couldn't walk out at all. So, what does Xia Shilong want to do? Keep her in captivity and eat her after she is fat? Wei Wei Bai was still confused about how to communicate with the dragon. The giant dragon's purple eyes suddenly became vertical, and anger and suppressed madness began to appear in his eyes. A terrible greed appeared in his eyes. Bai Weiwei instinctively felt the danger and shouted in a low voice, "Smash! Smash!" Blocked. Weiwei Bai? ? The silver dragon slowly stepped forward, and the gold coins under his feet creaked. His slender neck leaned forward, and suddenly he stuck out his tongue and licked her. This time it was too big, almost licking her whole body. It was wet. Weiwei Bai was stunned. Damn it! She was going to be swallowed alive by a dragon without leaving a corpse behind. Did he want to taste her before eating her alive? After licking her, the dragon seemed to think that she was delicious, but he was even more irritated. He seemed to think that she was too small. It was not enough for him to gnaw on. The giant dragon tilted its head and tried to stretch out its claws, as if it wanted to hug her. But the claws were too big. They would hurt her if they touched her. The dragon stared at her blankly for a moment, then thought of something and growled. The wind brought by the roar almost blew Weiwei Bai to the ground. In the next moment, everything before his eyes seemed like a magnificent dream. The giant dragon began to shrink, and its silver scales began to degrade. His dragon body began to degenerate, and he turned into a human. Xiaoya's sleek body appeared. Under his short, honey-like fluffy hair, his purple pupils were still dangerous and sharp. On his arms, legs, and back, there were scales that had not been completely removed. They were fine and smooth, hard and cold. You asked me how I knew about the sense of touch. This was because Weiwei Bai finally understood why the system was blocked. Because the dragon was in heat. Weiwei Bai looked at Xiaoya's pair of eyes that were still beastly and without reason, and couldn't help but tremble. "Xiaoya, wake up." In the depths of Xiaoya's purple pupils, there was a scarlet and terrifying possessiveness. The resentment of not being able to love. The possessiveness of adoration. In the heart of the youth who had lost his reason, there was a kind of crazy desire that stimulated him. And this kind of desire also gave birth to the most complete possessiveness of the dragon. His sleek body was almost lying on the carpet of gold coins. Just like a lazy snake, he looked up and stared at her strangely. Weiwei Bai took a deep breath. Then she slowly backed away. This guy was still a dragon, just wearing human skin. Her intuition told her that he was especially dangerous. Before she could turn around and run, she was already pushed down by the youth. Everything happened too quickly and messily. Gold coins scattered, countless jewels and coins, constantly clattering. In the empty and boundless underground castle. In the kingdom of gold coins piled up. Hiding the dragon's treasures. He wanted to protect her, lock her up, and even more wanted to possess her. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 90. Chapter 2579. A gorgeous underground kingdom of gold coins. In the cold air, there was a faintly discernible ambiguous aura. Xiaoya actually woke up very quickly, but he still followed his heart and held her in his arms. His bestial side suppressed all his rationality. In fact, there was not much rationality left. During this period of time, her resistance and indifference, and even her fearful eyes made him walk on the edge of madness. When he faced her, there was no rationality to speak of. In the cold gold and silver jewels, in the blanket woven with golden silk, the girl curled up and frowned. Xiaoya's body was naked, and he slowly reached out and wrapped her in the golden blanket that he had painstakingly pulled out from the gold coins. Her fair back and delicate collarbone. Xiaoya was wrapped up tightly. He was afraid that his rationality would be gone again. Then he got up and walked barefoot on the gold coins. This was an underground castle in the Dragon Mountain Range. The dragon race was a race that liked shiny wealth the most. He inherited all the power, inheritance, and memories of the dragon skeleton. The Holy Dragon was an ancient dragon with an ancestor-level status in the dragon race. In its inherited memories, there were all kinds of wealth, places, and secrets of various races, so much that it would take many years to digest them. It was also an accident that he brought her here. When he opened the space crack to leave the graveyard, he only had one thought in his mind. He might lose consciousness and not be able to hold her. So he had to lock her in a place where she could not escape while he was unconscious. This was not the best place. If he fainted for too long, she might be trapped here forever. After all, there was no food or drink here. But at that time, he only had this thought in his mind, which led him to bring her to a place where ordinary people could not get out. To put it nicely, it was an underground castle. In fact, it was a maze where the ancient dragon hid his wealth.
A few thousand meters underground.
It was not easy for a mage to get out after entering. Shaya stepped out of the maze and brought food, water, and clothes as fast as he could. She could not wear them. Shaya put the things aside and then silently looked at her sleeping. A bunch of dark thoughts flashed through his mind. The wound on his chest was already healed. Because of the dragon race's hard defense and self-healing ability, when he turned into a dragon, all wounds automatically healed. This was not good news. He had just done such a terrible thing to her. Although she could push the blame to him for losing his rationality, she couldn't do anything to him. But there was no way to maximize the benefits of this incident. His eyes were deep and dark, and his voice was strangely lingering. You have to soften her heart. Since he couldn't be her substitute, he could only think of other ways to pry open her heart. For example, a magnificent parting of life and death. It was a tragic drama where he was on the brink of death to protect her. How could he not handle the white hand bone in the graveyard? But so what if she dealt with it? She was going to revive that damned main character anyway. Once that damned Baron was resurrected, as a substitute, was he supposed to smile and bless her?
Dream on.
At that time, he had no other choice but to take her down with him. When the evil god descended, what flashed through his mind was not how the people of the continent would be like. Instead, he was thinking about how to use this terrifying attack to make her believe that he was willing to sacrifice his life for her. Chapter 2580. It would be best if he could be seriously injured and unable to move.
Make her feel guilty and stay.
It didn't matter if she felt guilty or even pitied a cripple like him. As long as her heart softened and she stayed, he would have a chance. Shaya gently leaned over. When his cold purple eyes looked at her, they were unusually hot and anxious. His fingers gently landed on her hair, caressing it bit by bit. It was as if this could soothe his tangled and uncomfortable emotions. A dragon's estrus period was very long. At most, it could last for more than 10 years. His dragonized body had always thirsted for her. But if it was too much, the fact that he had recovered from his serious injuries would be discovered. Shaya couldn't help but lower his head and lick her delicate cheeks. A layer of silver scales appeared on his face. The ancient dragon's huge power had been affecting him. His breath was hot, and he tried to move his body away. Then he reached out and touched his chest. The wound on it had healed to the point where only blood was left. Shaya's beautiful purple eyes narrowed coldly. He complained silently. How disappointing. You recovered so quickly. After saying that, a golden light blade appeared on his finger, and he stabbed it into his chest without hesitation. Although he avoided the heart, the sharp pain made his face turn pale. Blood flowed down. He pursed his lips. The light blade on his finger had more healing power, and the blood slowly stopped. The wound couldn't be too fresh, or else it wouldn't be real. He carefully calculated the condition of the wound. In the end, it was a bloody and terrifying bloody hole. On her beautiful and pure white chest, the blood that had been dried by the light was like a sticky flower blooming. She used her power to stop the wound from healing. Shaya observed for a while, then pursed his lips and smiled in satisfaction. Then, he touched his chin and lowered his eyes to think for a moment. A dark calculation appeared in his purple eyes. For insurance. Continue to pretend to be a dragon? No, the dragon was too big. It was not convenient to carry her. When he lost his mind just now, he almost hurt her when he wanted to carry her. Shaya stretched out his hand and let his beastly nature boil. Scales appeared on his arms and ankles. Even on his forehead, a beautiful silver scale appeared. On the back of his collarbone, there were also scales in the shape of wings. This half-dragon, half-human should be enough. This series of tidying up finally made Shaya feel relieved. Then, he reached out and carefully pulled her into his arms along with a golden blanket, using the uncomfortable jewels as a pillow. He used one of his legs to press down on the blanket by her feet so that she was wrapped in his arms. Then he closed his eyes and waited for her to wake up. When Wei Wei Bai woke up, she felt as if her bones had been crushed. Gold coins and jewels were not as useful as a soft bed. Tossing and turning in this place. His back was bruised. Wei Wei Bai's expression turned ugly. Smash them all. Tom finally came out and roared. How could it automatically detect the possibility of bad news and then block me? Nothing happened. Wei Wei Bai. The system also realized that this scene was a little inappropriate for children. By Wei Wei. And maybe the detection found a dragon in Estrus, so even if nothing has happened, it automatically blocked you. The system said, you sure are quick to upgrade when dealing with me. All the other instruments that you need are about to be scrapped. This automatic block had been upgraded a few times already. Next time, would it automatically upgrade to block him from the beginning to the end of the strategy? The reason was that bad news might appear during the strategy. To make it easier for you to read next time, you can click Save below to record this reading record. Chapter 2581. Wei Wei Bai felt a human figure hugging her from behind. Her eyes twitched, and her bones ached even more. Fortunately, it was still a human. If it was a dragon, she would have been crushed into minced meat, and she could have made a few meatballs for the dragon as dessert. Wei Wei Bai asked, is the danger over? The system had just come out and it saw the gory scene. Although the host was wrapped in a blanket, it could not see anything. But the scene was so ambiguous. It was not wrong to block it in advance. This kind of scene was too hardcore. The system told her what it saw. Wei Wei Bai quickly turned around and saw Shaya, who had returned to his human form, curled up with a pale face. The wound on his chest was even scarier. When he turned into a dragon, he was so lively. How did he return to his human form and end up so miserable? Wei Wei Bai pulled the blanket, sat up, and reached out to check his breathing. It was very weak, but she could still feel his vitality. Could it be that it was too intense, and he died from the intensity? The main and side missions were still a breath away. Shaya could not die at this time. Wei Wei Bai was thinking about how to get him some medicine without attracting attention. She saw that there were a few beautiful dresses and a lunchbox beside her. Wei Wei Bai. Then she looked at Shaya. The beautiful pale boy was frowning, his eyelashes trembling, as if he was in so much pain that it was difficult for him to pass out. Wei Wei Bai then looked at the dresses again. A seriously injured fellow actually remembered to go out and get me clothes and food? The system said, maybe he loves you too much, and his space magic is not very good. So it was not difficult to get these things. Wei Wei Bai shook her head. Although these things are weird, it makes sense, but the dresses are all lacy, purple and gold, rose patterns, and even conservative and gorgeous. This was Shaya's aesthetic. The standard aesthetic of gorgeous. Wei Wei Bai pointed at the dresses. Have you seen a dying guy, bleeding while choosing clothes? The uniformity and magnificence of these dresses had to be specially chosen. He didn't take it casually. The system and the host looked at the boy who was curled up on the gem. Finally, at the same time, they sighed. He's really good at pretending. This was a compliment, not a derogatory one. This was the first time he had seen someone who could use the ruse of self-injury to gain sympathy to the brink of death. Wei Wei Bai. Look at how pitiful he is. If it weren't for the side quest, I would have treated him better. After saying that, Wei Wei Bai struggled to get up. Her body was sticky and uncomfortable. She wiped herself with a golden blanket before putting on her dress. Then she began to treat his wound. Other than mountains of gold and silver, there was nothing else that could be used. Not even a bandage could be found. She could only bite the other dress with her teeth. Then he cleaned the wound and tied it with a cloth. She opened the food box. It was food that was easier to digest. She took out the broth. The rich and warm smell was kept warm by magic. Wei Wei Bai stared at the pot of soup in silence. It was full of loopholes. Since he was about to die, it was still acceptable to get 2 cold pieces of bread. Even the soup was kept warm. If he was so strong, why didn't he treat his wound? Shea closed his eyes tightly and heard the rustling sound of clothes being changed. His breathing deepened, and his skin began to heat up again. His dragon instincts were terrifying. He used all his strength to not reach out and grab her. Between breaths, his sensitive sense of smell detected her scent slowly approaching. Chapter 2582. The next moment, she gently supported the back of his head with her fingers and fed him the warm soup bit by bit. All of a sudden, Shaya seemed to have returned to the time when they were together. At that time, he couldn't move. She also fed him bit by bit and patiently fed him. But at that time, she thought he was her lover.
But now, she was feeding him.
It was a similar scene, but the state of mind was very different. Wei Wei Bai's voice was weak and sad. "Wake up, Shaya." She was really calling his name now. And not that damn dead person. Shaya didn't feel any pain at all. Even if it hurt, it felt good. He knew she was soft-hearted. The hope he had staked his life on came true. Wei Wei Bai fed in the soup while crying. She was thinking about how much soup was left. She was hungry too. Patience didn't need to eat too much.
So there should be more than half left.
When she was almost done, Wei Wei Bai turned around to drink the soup. Because she was too sad, she couldn't eat too much of the rest of the exquisite food in the food box. Wei Wei Bai snorted. Who isn't a drama queen? When she was almost done, she put down the bowl and turned around. She looked into a pair of purple eyes. Those eyes were ignorant and innocent. The young man looked at her in confusion. Then, he reached out with difficulty. The scales on his arm were exquisite. Grabbing her wrist with his fingertips, Shaya smiled weakly. "Are you my partner?" Wei Wei Bai. "Oh my god, amnesia syndrome?" Wei Wei Bai stared at him blankly. She felt that, in terms of drama, she actually lost. She loosened the bowl in her hand, and it fell into the gold coins. Then, she looked at him helplessly. Tears rolled in her eyes as if she was frightened.
Shaya?
Shaya stared at her curiously for a while. His eyes were full of affection. "You're so beautiful," and he brought the back of her hand to his lips and licked it. "You have my scent all over you. You must be my partner." Wei Wei Bai's fingers trembled, as if she wanted to pull them back. Shaya screamed in pain, his face deathly pale. Wei Wei Bai froze, not daring to move. Shaya immediately grinned foolishly. "It doesn't hurt." Blood seeped out of the cloth on his chest again. Wei Wei Bai seemed to be sure that he was not in the right state. She leaned over and put her hand on his shoulder. "Lie down." To catch her, he had to sit up. Shaya stared at her blankly, his fingertips caressing her wrist casually. The genuine worry in her eyes made him lie down obediently. Wei Wei Bai's voice trembled. "You're injured. Don't move. Do you know how to get clothes and food? We need medicine." Shaya stared at her for a while, and then stretched out his hand with a pale face. Suddenly, a crack appeared in the air. A pile of bandages and medicine fell in. He fell right beside Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai. Shaya looked innocent and cute. Medicine. Wei Wei Bai. What a professional and smart retard. She didn't seem to care about asking anything. She immediately went to get the bandages and then looked at the type of medicine. Finally, she wrapped his wound with medicine again. Shaya lay down obediently from beginning to end. The scales on his body were still there, and his eyes were abnormally confused. The delicate youth was like a decadent flower on a jewel. Bloomed gorgeously, but also with a fragile temperament. He held Wei Wei Bai's finger with great dependence. "My brain can't remember anything, but I know that I love you." It was a rogue and innocent confession. Wei Wei Bai frowned and wanted to refute, but seeing the wound on his chest, all the words were choked in her mouth. In the end, she sighed and said, "It's all my fault." Shaya looked at her sideways, his eyes sparkling beautifully under his eyelashes. "I think I'm willing to let you hurt me." Wei Wei Bai's eyelashes trembled, and her breathing paused. She seemed to be a little touched, but in the end, the girl gently turned her head, and only a trace of red appeared on her cheeks. As delicate as a cherry. The corners of Xiaoya's mouth slightly rose. He knew that pretending to be pitiful would be so useful.
What kind of substitute is he?
A soft-hearted little, which is the most adorable. Side mission progress. 97. The system was holding the latest small dried fish and eating it expressionlessly. It looked at the shy but expressionless host, and then looked at the pitiful but black-bellied male lead. Ha, it's all a trick. A trick of a drama queen. Chapter 2583. Wei Wei Bai rolled up the bandage little by little. The effect of the medicine was not good. The wound healed very slowly. She put the things in the basket. Xiao would take things from the void every day with an innocent face, as if it was normal. She couldn't bear to expose him. He could even play with amnesia jokes like playing house. But he was very good at pretending to be weak. The wound healed so slowly. According to the system, every time she was asleep, he would take off the bandage and dig his wound again. Wei Wei Bai heard it. He is a ruthless person, a werewolf, a wolf. I don't dare to compare. A target who can hurt himself so much. Wei Wei Bai said to treat him carefully, worried that the abuse would be too excessive, causing him to become too evil. Suddenly come to destroy the world and perish together with her is not a good thing. Even the dragon has changed. Becoming a psychopath is just a matter of minutes. Wei Wei Bai scooped the soup into a bowl, and then she carefully blew on it, blowing away the hot air. Xiao lay on the soft mattress. He was afraid that the place would be uncomfortable, so he even sent the mattress and the bedding. In the gold coin kingdom, among the countless glittering treasures, a small, warm nest appeared. The young man with the ability to control space could get everything with a raise of his hand. The butler of Rose Castle was not surprised to see that something was missing. He was even happy. After all, only Rose Duke had this unique ability to control space. This meant that the Duke was fine. As for why he didn't appear, there must be some big conspiracy brewing. After all, the royal family was desperate. The butler was responsible and asked the kitchen to make soup 3 times a day, and then let the food disappear automatically. Today, the butler was still the most responsible. Wei Wei Bai sat beside Shea, lowering her head and seriously feeding him soup. The young man's eyes were still childish and clear, and the scales on his body were beautiful and strange. He raised his head, and there was an inhuman, exquisite feeling on his perfect face. In his purple eyes, there was only an incomparably deep affection. Wei Wei Bai frowned, and there was a trace of trouble in her eyes. She seemed to find his gaze too disturbing. However, when she saw the heavy injuries on his chest, she couldn't help but sigh. In the end, she couldn't bear to say anything harsh. Everything was as it had been in the beginning. It was warm and peaceful, although the little witch sometimes looked like she was in a dilemma. But compared to when he had locked her up and forced her, her hatred was much, much better. Seeing that she had finished feeding him, Shea turned around to tidy up the food box. A dark and burning emotion appeared in his beautiful and ignorant eyes. He lowered his eyes and suppressed the desire for her that kept surging in his heart.
Now he had to take it one step at a time.
He couldn't screw it up again. Since he couldn't use her as a substitute, he could only use his guilt to keep her. Then he would slowly erode her life. He didn't believe that he couldn't beat a dead man. No matter how deep her feelings for the dead man, it definitely wouldn't take a long time. The great magician was very old, so he would sign a symbiotic contract with her in the future. Then their ages would be the same. After such a long time, she would definitely slowly forget about the dead man. After all, the dead had no time.
And he did.
Xiao's gloomy eyes were calculating and scheming, making his pupils darken even more. He stretched out his finger and rubbed the bridge of his nose to cover it up, but the corners of his mouth couldn't help but evoke a smile. Chapter 2584. Wei Wei Bai held the bread and nibbled silently. As for Shea, The substitute side quest and the main quest favorability were similar. There was only one time left to be determined. She didn't know how long the time would be out of order in this world. She wondered if she understood the hundreds of thousands of repair costs. Wei Wei Bai thought that it was better to continue with the repair. If she could afford to repair those expensive instruments, she wouldn't need to travel through worlds. She would have become a winner in life in reality. She would marry a tall, rich, and handsome man, become a CEO, and reach the peak of life. Being a drama queen was also very tiring. She didn't know when she could retire. Wei Wei Bai finished the bread, took out the knitting needle, and sat next to Xia to knit. Imbecile Xia rolled on the gold coins childishly, insisting that he was cold and wanted her to make a scarf for him. He was so good at space magic. Couldn't he get it through space? But she couldn't expose him, so she could only knit a scarf for him. Scarf won't strangle you. Wei Wei Bai complained in her heart as she gently knitted the scarf. Xia quietly lay next to her, squinting and watching without disturbing her. He was very patient, like a dragon quietly guarding its treasure. Wei Wei Bai didn't know day and night. She could only roughly calculate how long she had been in this place based on 3 meals. She was with Xia day and night every day. His wounds were slowly healing, and the boy was beginning to be lively. He dug around in the gold coins every day and from time to time took out a priceless crown or necklace. Then he carefully gave it to her. Bai Weiwei wanted to refuse, but when she saw his ignorant eyes, a trace of guilt flashed across her face as she accepted it. The jewelry was indeed beautiful, but she was tired of it. After all, she came to a gold coin kingdom, which was full of gold, silver, and jewelry. After looking at it for a long time, you would feel that the sky and earth outside were much fresher. If you have too much money, you will be annoyed. After Wei Wei Bai pretentiously sighed, she casually piled the crown and whatnot aside. People were all vain things. Didn't he want so many inedible and drinkable jewels just to show them off? In the end, in this damned place, there was nothing but jewels. What's the use? There wasn't even anyone to look at it. Even if Xia Ruoxin played dumb, she wouldn't attack him too much before she completed the side mission. He had accidentally maxed out her favorability. The side quests were not full yet. What if she was disfigured? Wei Wei Bai was in a daze out of habit. Her beautiful eyelashes were drooping, and her fair face looked sickly fragile. Because there was no sunlight here, only some magical jewels gave off a dazzling light. It was not a good place for humans to live. After not seeing the sun for a long time, the human body couldn't take it. The golden light fell on her collarbone, and it could be seen that the curve of her collarbone had deepened. Half lying down, Xiaoya's gaze slowly moved down from her sharp chin to her beautiful neck, as well as her deep collarbone. His eyes darkened. Holding her captive like this, her body couldn't take it after a long time. Although he had locked her up previously, he had used the best of everything to raise her. He couldn't wait to raise her into the best and the most delicate person in the world. Although she hated him to death and desperately fought with him, but because he had thought of ways to protect and care for her, her body was in a very good condition. She wasn't thin anymore. But now in this place, she couldn't eat or sleep well. Although it was safe. She couldn't run out, but that wasn't his intention. Xiao lowered his eyes and thought for a long time, then asked tentatively, Wei Wei, do you want to go out? Chapter 2585. Wei Wei Bai's fingers paused as she knitted the scarf. Then, she slowly raised her head with a confused look in her eyes. Can we go out? She didn't seem to think that he could bring her out. After all, in her eyes, he was a seriously injured patient. Xia choked for a moment, but when he heard her say we, his mood instantly improved. Like a child who didn't understand the world, he stretched out his hands to support his body, his beautiful eyes shining brightly. Wei Wei wants to go out. I'll bring you out. I can fly. Wei Wei Bai looked at him in confusion for a while before turning to look around. But this place seems to be underground. We might not be able to fly out. And your wound. Xia immediately patted his chest and grimaced in pain. It doesn't hurt anymore. I'm fine. Wei Wei Bai looked at his strangely comical face and finally couldn't help but burst out laughing. The girl's pale face had a few more traces of red. It was like a red rose blooming on the snow, delicate and lively. Her eyes were moist and bright as she shook her head at the dazed boy. Forget it. We'll talk about it when you're better. Shaya only felt like his heart was struck by lightning from her smile. It was sharp and touching. She smiled at him. She finally smiled at him. Shaya lowered his head a little awkwardly, the pain and joy in his heart coming in waves. It really made him look like a child as his face flushed red. Ever since that desperate wedding, she had never smiled at him so innocently and happily. The boy's hoarse voice rang out. I want to make you happy. I really want to. He had always wanted to, but when she looked at him with hatred, he knew that he had messed everything up. Shaya slowly blinked his eyes and a mist appeared. You look so good when you smile. Wei Wei Bai paused, her smile gradually fading. Then, she lowered her head and started knitting the scarf in a panic.
What do you mean by that? Don't be so glib.
He stared at the blush on her ears and couldn't help but laugh. The uneasiness and darkness in his heart lessened a little. He suddenly reached out and grabbed her, pulling her into his embrace. The young man's strong embrace, his breath cold and carried a certain fragrance. He buried his face in the crook of her neck and whispered, I love you. Although I don't remember anything, I love your smile, your warmth, your kiss, your... Wei Wei Bai blushed and couldn't help but shout, Shaya. Shaya lazily replied, I like everything about you. With that said, membranous wings broke out from the young man's shoulder blades. His face began to change. The young man turned into a dragon, and his huge wings enveloped the petite girl. He crouched down, and the noble silver dragon placed his head on the ground in front of the girl. As if he felt that he was too big, the giant dragon's body began to shrink under a burst of silver light. It had shrunk by about a third. When he felt that it was about right, he used his dragon face to carefully rub the corner of her skirt. As a dragon, he didn't seem to know how to speak. Therefore, it could only be expressed through clumsy actions. Wei Wei Bai stood in front of the dragon, and countless gold coins began to fall because of the vibrations. In the rain of gold coins, the silver dragon was noble like a king, and looked at her humbly and sincerely. Wei Wei Bai hesitated for a long time, then reached out and slowly touched his dragon face, then reached out and hugged his dragon horns, and climbed up little by little. The dragon had become much smaller, so it was easier to climb up. Chapter 2586. Shaya only felt that the petite girl was as light as a feather. The delicate fragrance and the careful touch made his pupils erect sensitively. He wanted her. He thought about it all the time. After all, dragons were especially lustful creatures. In front of their loved ones, they never knew what it meant to suppress their instincts. When he faced her like this, he had to spend several times more reason than usual to suppress his impulses. But it was all worth it. Her occasional gentleness now could make him endure any torment and pain. Shaya raised his head and roared. The violent fluctuations of power caused several mountains of gold coins to collapse. He spread his membrane wings, and the silver dragon let out a sharp roar, causing a huge crack to appear thousands of meters underground. It was the gold coins that rolled down the long cracked stone path. The gorgeous gold coins paved the road, and the silver dragon flew up, with its princess on its back, rushing up. Wei Wei Bai hugged the dragon's neck, her skirt caught by a scale. Her long hair spread out, and in the strong wind, countless gold coins fell on her hair and skirt. Everything was like a dream. At the end of the crack, there was a hole. Shaya rushed out, and the sky appeared. The snowflakes on the ground also flew up. Wei Wei Bai narrowed her eyes and found that the dragon was gradually rising and soaring. She saw the earth, the endless mountains, and the snow-capped trees. All became small, and a picture scroll unfolded under her. Wei Wei Bai exclaimed, Shaya, where are you going? Shaya didn't answer, but kept flying higher and higher, flying under the blue sky. Gradually, Wei Wei Bai didn't say anything, but was fascinated by the beautiful scenery. The dragon carried the girl and flew around its territory. The ancient dragon mountains were steep and beautiful. This was the place occupied by the dragon, and it was also the dowry that the dragon gave to the bride. Xiaya accepted all the wealth of the ancient dragon, and he wanted to give all this wealth to his little witch. The wealth of time, the beautiful scenery of the mountains. Not even a smile of the girl lying on top of him. Xiaya's low and hoarse voice came, and for the first time, he spoke in the image of a dragon. "Marry me, Wei Wei. Although I have forgotten everything, I know that I love you." This was not a lie. It was not a scheme, nor was it a calculated statement. These were words that came from the bottom of his heart. He loved her. This feeling was so turbulent, but it was real. Xiao didn't think that he could fall to this point, and still be willing to do so. From the moment he was born, he had received more glory and wealth than anyone else. But what was the use of all this? It couldn't compare to the time he spent with her in that shabby house. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 93. The girl behind him seemed to have regained her senses. She was stunned for a long time. In the end, she didn't say anything and just sighed faintly. He seemed to be very guilty and very sad. But he didn't refute him. Xiaya knew that everything was too late, and this was already a very good attitude. She still slowly softened. The silver dragon landed on the highest mountain peak. There was a huge hot spring lake here, and flowers were blooming around the lake. He put her down. His silver claws even carefully hooked her skirt from the scales and put it down. His movements were clumsy, but strangely cute. The silver dragon turned back into a young man. He smiled cutely and innocently. "Wei Wei Bai, you can take a bath here." It was as if the young man who confessed just now wasn't him. He wasn't embarrassed at all and returned to his usual state. Wei Wei Bai stood among the flowers. She lowered her head and thought for a while. Then she slowly raised her eyes and said in a low voice, "Xiaya, can you let him out?" Xiaya looked at her in confusion. "Who?" Wei Wei Bai was silent for a long time. Then her dim eyes trembled. "My lover." The innocent expression on Xiaya's face stiffened for a moment, and then he smiled. "I don't remember. Wei Wei Bai, do you have a lover? Is it me?" These shameless words sounded a little pitiful and aggrieved. Wei Wei Bai slowly shook her head, her eyes fixed on him. Finally, she said in a low voice, "Duke, I know you didn't lose your memory." The smile on Xiaya's face stiffened. His body also stiffened, as if he had turned into stone. Finally, the adorable, idiotic expression on his face disappeared. His voice was slow and low. "You know?" Wei Wei Bai looked sideways at the hot spring and smiled helplessly. "Well, after all, your acting is very clumsy. But you let me know." Her voice was soft and gentle. "So you love me so much." / Chapter 2587. Her gentle gaze fell on him. For the first time, the long-haired girl's face didn't have any resentment or resentment. An expression that was so calm that it was close to warmth made her look exceptionally beautiful. The color of Xiaya's purple eyes faded, and her figure was clearly reflected in them. Wei Wei Bai crossed her hands and revealed a helpless smile. "I really have someone in my heart. I can't forget the days I spent with him in my life, so I really feel disgusted by your coercion." Xiaya's thin lips squirmed, and finally his eyes dimmed. He couldn't say anything. He was so arrogant. He had never suffered a big loss since he was young. He had never encountered such a difficult situation of falling in love with someone. So when he found that he couldn't get what he wanted, his first reaction wasn't to patiently pursue. Instead, it was to directly plunder. To force himself to be imprisoned, and to force her to love him. In the end, when he couldn't get anything, he never thought of letting her go. He thought that even if he couldn't get anything, hatred was fine too. Everyone was in hell together, and she couldn't escape. This was the best ending he had ever thought of. Of course, Xiaya knew that he was wrong, but he had no way out.
He could only keep making mistakes.
Bai Weiwei looked up at the blue sky, incomparably clear. Her eyes softened. But you almost died in my arms, so I forgive you. Xiao's eyes lit up. Weiwei Bai's lips curled, revealing a gentle smile. So when I saw you pretending to have amnesia, I didn't expose you. Actually, I didn't hate you that much. At least before you locked me up, I felt endless guilt towards you. The guilt came from mistaking her for someone else. After all, this was her fault. Weiwei Bai sighed. Xia, I don't blame you, and I don't hate you, so are you willing to let me go? We can actually be friends.
Be friends.
Xiao's pupils shrank sharply for a moment. He lowered his head, his hair covering his beautiful and ruthless eyes, not revealing any of his hostility and darkness. He had to be patient. He couldn't scare her away anymore. He had to suppress his selfish possessiveness and let her think that he was harmless. Only then would she slowly approach him. Her willingness to forgive him for his despicable actions was already a good start. He kept convincing himself of his unwillingness and crazy twisted thoughts. Xiao's delicate jaw tightened, and his thin lips were tightly pursed, slightly trembling. In the end, he seemed to have thought it through. He slowly raised his eyes, which were red. Weak grievance and sad decadence appeared at the same time. A kind of extreme fragility made him look like he was on the verge of collapse. He moved his lips. Are you really willing to forgive me? Weiwei Bai paused slightly, and a sincere and gentle expression appeared on her beautiful face. Yes, I forgive you. Xiao's eyelashes trembled as if he was suppressing something. He opened his eyes, and his tightly pursed lips finally relaxed. Then, I'll let you go, and we can be friends. Weiwei Bai heaved a sigh of relief, and couldn't help but laugh. The girl's snow-white face blushed a little because of her joy, making her look as delicate as a blooming flower. Xiao stared blankly for a moment, his heart beating fiercely. He didn't know how long he could suppress it. She had become a damned, unimportant pervert who could only wait for her silently like an old dog. It was not an easy thing to do. Xiao could only carefully collect and hide the memories of having her in the past. Teak. Chapter 2588. After all, he had to turn her from a friend to a good friend, then a lover, a wife, etc. He didn't know how long it would take. 5 years, 10 years, 30 years, maybe a lifetime. Xiao silently suppressed the sad cases of waiting for a lifetime and still being friends in the end. He didn't believe that she couldn't be moved by 10 or 20 years. As long as the man she loved was dead, she didn't have any thoughts of resurrecting him. He could definitely wait until she fell in love with him. Although it was very sweet to force and imprison her, it was also very refreshing. But it wasn't a long-term solution. After all, she wasn't a real little bird. He couldn't lock her up for a lifetime. If he locked her up for too long, she would definitely self-destruct. Xiao was still uncomfortably calculating how many years he could wait. Weiwei Bai's voice came faintly from the other side. Then can you give me Xiao's body? Xiao's body. He couldn't wait to change the man's name. It was really disgusting. Xiao's heart was bleeding, but he forced a pitiful smile. Okay, Weiwei, I'll help you resurrect him, okay? After saying that, he reached out and touched the ground. On the green grass, a white skeleton appeared. Weiwei Bai's eyes were full of nostalgia. She squatted down and was about to reach out to touch the skeleton. Xiao's expression was very ugly. He grabbed her wrist to stop her. You can't touch him. He has been contaminated by evil energy. There should be a plague on his bones. Weiwei Bai's fingers paused and her lips trembled. A sad expression appeared on her face. He can't be at peace even if he dies. Xiao's eyes were red with jealousy, but he wanted to be a perfect good friend. So he generously suggested. He might not be able to be resurrected with resurrection water. Even if he is resurrected, there might be a plague. It's very dangerous. Why don't you give him to me? I'll try to purify the evil energy in his body and resurrect him. Weiwei Bai was stunned. Is it very dangerous? Xia, a little dangerous. After all, Evil energy is very difficult to remove. If the purification fails, the corpse might be destroyed. He would fail, and he would fail flawlessly. He purified the repulsive skeleton until it was beyond recognition. It was best to purify it into dust, sweep it, and pour it into the manure pit. Wei Wei Bai frowned and said worriedly, "I mean, are you in danger?" Xiaya stared blankly, and great joy welled up in his heart, but he firmly endured it. Then, a reluctant and troubled expression appeared on his face. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "It's not dangerous. For you, no danger is dangerous. If the purification fails and backfires, it might cripple me. This kind of thing isn't dangerous at all." Wei Wei Bai, could he be any more straightforward? He said that it wasn't dangerous, but in the end, all he said was that it was very dangerous and that he should take pity on him. Bai Weiwei felt that the target's acting skills were really blindingly bad. After complaining in his heart, he still had to continue trying to ignore the other party's intentions. She lowered her head and looked at the skeleton anxiously. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't reach out to touch it. Seeing her like this, Xiaya pursed his lips. Finally, he gritted his teeth and said, "I'll purify him." After saying that, he stretched out his hand, and a white healing light appeared between his fingers. Magic elements were about to condense, but a hand suddenly pressed down on the back of his hand, preventing his movements. The youth's movements paused, and he heard the little witch's sweet and soft voice, with a touch of sadness and worry. "Don't, you'll hurt yourself." Chapter 2589. Originally, Xiaya wanted to accidentally purify the skeleton into dust with a slap. Her delay had prevented him from having any bad intentions. However, he felt a sweet warmth in his heart.
She was worried about him.
He really wanted to reach out and hug her and kiss her hair. Unfortunately, this was not an action that a friend could do. Xiaya could only helplessly endure. After Wei Wei Bai released his hand, she quietly sat beside the skeleton, hugging her knees with both hands. "Can I stay with him for a while?" she asked cautiously, her eyes fixed on the skeleton. Xiaya silently stared at her sad-side face for a long time before finally saying, "Okay." Who made him a friend? Xiaya turned around and disappeared, reappearing in a forest not far away. He was also squatting with his hands on his knees. His fingers pinched the trousers on his knees. His eyes were red, and his delicate face looked somewhat sinister because of twisted jealousy. Like a big wild wolf peeping at treasures, Xiaya bitterly grabbed a few flowers and crushed them one by one. All that was left was a skeleton. Why don't you just die? Resurrection, dream on. If the skeleton is resurrected, he will have no chance at all. Those poor souls who wait for a lifetime but can't wait for the person they like to appreciate them. White-haired, wrinkled face trembling holding the portrait, miserable old man who can't die. It seems that this is his end. Xiaya grabbed the flowers and secretly looked at Wei Wei Bai. His face was ferocious, his eyes were red, and tears were about to come out. Still looking. Why is she still looking? What is there to look at? Why look for so long? A skeleton. How can it be better looking than him? Even if he becomes a skeleton, he is the final form of the undead, especially handsome, especially good. His bones are much whiter than others. It also has a mysterious feeling of magic elements. When he becomes a skeleton, will she look at him more? Xiaya crushed the flowers. He really can't bear it, so he should think of a way to destroy the eyesore of the skeleton. Or explode the hot spring volcano, and then he will rush out with the little witch and disappear. Let the skeleton disappear in the magma.
Perfect.
He couldn't be blamed for this, could he? Just as Xiaya was about to set up a large-scale magic array to detonate the volcano, a voice suddenly rang out. However, the little witch finally moved her eyes away, sighed faintly, and then slowly stood up. Perhaps she had been squatting for too long. She staggered a few steps. In the blink of an eye, Xiaya came to her side and reached out to hold her waist. The softness of her slender waist made his Adam's apple move. He was afraid that his bad intentions would be seen through. He politely let go of her waist. His fingers were reluctant to let go, but his mouth was full of hypocrisy. Be careful, it's slippery here. Wei Wei Bai stared blankly at the skeleton and chatted with the system for a long time. For a moment, his expression did not return to normal, and he appeared to be a little dazed. In Xiaoya's eyes, this was what grief looked like. His eyes were deep and depressed, and the corners of his eyes were red, making him look somewhat pitiful. But he still tried his best to comfort her. I will help you resurrect him. Don't worry. Even if he couldn't wait to kill this skeleton, he couldn't say it out loud and had to pretend to comfort her. Xiaoya felt that he had turned from a despicable bully into a sinister and vicious clown. He thought about how to get rid of this skeleton every day. He had to lick his face and be considerate to pretend to be a good person. He was used to being arrogant since he was young and had never been so submissive. When the little witch heard this, her expression eased, and her bright eyes finally had a trace of life. Xiaoya's heart also eased. What's wrong with feeling wronged? A man should be wronged to make the person he loves happy. Chapter 2590. He saw that Wei Wei Bai's pink face was a little red under the sun. Although it was beautiful, it was a burden to the skin. Just as he was about to send her back to the dragon's nest, she suddenly said, I want to burn him to ashes. Can I get rid of the evil energies control this way? Xiaoya's outstretched hand stiffened. Wei Wei Bai looked back at him seriously and said word by word, Can I? Xiaoya's voice was hoarse. Yes, fire can burn all the evil energy, but if you burn to ashes, you can't be resurrected. Wei Wei Bai smiled. Her smile was a little weak, but it was unusually firm. I don't think he wants to be resurrected like this. As a witch's servant, he might not have his own consciousness and forget everything to live. She paused for a moment. Finally, she sighed. When he died, I also lost everything. I had no mother, no lover. Actually, at that time, I didn't even care about my life. Xiaoya stood aside, not daring to say anything. Of course, he knew that she didn't care about her life. Because at that time, she was so weak and yet she dared to fight with the East District Bishop. What else could it be other than courting death? Wei Wei Bai's eyes were a little blank, as if she was recalling something. Later, I read the books about witches' servants and found out that there was a way to resurrect the person I loved. I risked everything to resurrect him, not only because I loved him, but also because I wanted to save myself. Wei Wei Bai laughed self-deprecatingly. Because I already had a reason to live. Resurrecting my lover was at least a reason to live. Xiaoya felt like a lump of wet rags had been stuffed into his chest. It was very uncomfortable. No matter how thick-skinned he was, he didn't dare to raise his head. Because everything about her was actually planned by the Rose family behind the scenes. These plans didn't necessarily go through his hands because the matter was too small and couldn't be delivered to him. But it was indeed him who gave the order to destroy the witches. Her mother and lover had both died because they were accused of being witches. The source of all this was not the bishop, but him. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment. Her eyes were bright. I think I can accept the fact that the most important person in my life is gone, so I want him to die in peace. I don't want to disturb him anymore. Xiaoya's incomparably bright purple eyes stared at her for a long time. Only then did he ask, no regrets. Wei Wei Bai shook her head seriously. I don't regret it. I think I can live seriously even if I'm alone. Xiaoya slowly breathed, suppressing his impulses, and finally raised his hand. A huge cluster of flames suddenly ignited on the bone. In the gorgeous firelight, the bones slowly melted. Wei Wei Bai stared blankly. A drop of tear fell from the corner of her eye. She shivered but did not stop it in the end. However, the young man was already standing behind her, his arms wrapped around her body. His body was very hot, as if he was desperately suppressing something. His skin was even trembling. Wei Wei Bai struggled to say something. The young man behind her had already buried his head in her delicate shoulder. His hoarse voice was very gentle. You still have me. Even as a friend, don't reject me. Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips, only to find that his lips had already begun to kiss her skin. She frowned. What are you doing? Xiaya stiffened. His lips rubbed against her skin, and he whispered, comforting you. Wei Wei Bai, we are friends. Xiaya. I can't help it. I'll start being your friend tomorrow. I want to hug you. Wei Wei Bai. Don't blame him for being a beast. Is this hug a literal hug, or? However, Xiaya really just hugged her and didn't let go. He also desperately explained, I feel bad when I see you cry. You comfort me and let me kiss you, with an attitude beyond friendship. I won't do anything really. The young man was anxious to explain. His arms around her body were gentle but strong. Although he wanted to be a friend, he failed miserably. The Duke was still in a difficult situation, but he was desperately trying to take advantage of her. Wei Wei Bai, she had no confidence in a beast's self-control. Fortunately, the side mission was finally completed. The moment the Duke's skeleton was burned, the discomfort in his heart disappeared. Finally, he didn't want to be a substitute, and she finally didn't have to be disfigured. Chapter 2591. Finally, Xiaya was in a good mood because he didn't have to worry about the skeleton coming back and snatching her away from him, although she was just a friend. But it was better than being an enemy. Fortunately, the little witch's hatred target was only the Church of Light. In the future, he would try to restrain the Church's wanton expansion and keep the Church low-key. If the Bishop of the East region could, Xiaya's eyes turned cold. After all, the Bishop of the East region was famous for his ruthlessness. He was the Church's best dog, but also a poisonous dog. He had killed countless people and wrongly accused others from time to time. He would let the Archbishop deal with this matter when he returned. The indifferent aura of a superior made the young man leaning against the pile of gold coins feel a bone-chilling hostility. His calm purple eyes surged with a dark and treacherous coldness. His honey-colored hair didn't bring him any warmth. Instead, it made his pale but delicate face look even colder. Suddenly, a soft murmur sounded beside him. The coldness in Xiaya's eyes completely shattered. He immediately turned his head, and his eyes lit up. He found that the little witch who was curled up beside him and sleeping under a blanket had just turned over. She hadn't woken up yet. Xiaya breathed a sigh of relief. The strong indifference just now turned into a guilty conscience. He suppressed the schemes in his heart. Xiaya pulled his collar, trying to show the skin under the collar. Didn't they want to be friends? With the beauty of his empire's rose, he didn't believe that he would accompany her and show his beautiful character from time to time. Strong body, sacred magic, amazing wealth. What was more important was that he was obedient. How could she not be tempted? Xiaya, who was ready for a protracted battle, gently covered the little witch with a blanket. Then he continued to hug his knees and squatted beside the blanket. Like a puppy guarding the princess, he looked at her with bright eyes. Looking at her soft cheeks, soft and beautiful brown hair, and the skin that had just bathed in the hot spring and was still emitting a beautiful smell. So cute. So delicious. The young man, who still had the beast nature of a dragon, couldn't help but stick out the tip of his tongue and lick his thin lips. His eyes also didn't look right. He suppressed it, only to find that something had appeared behind him. Looking back, he found that it was a silver tail that was flapping gold coins. However, due to the excessive suppression, the dragon's true form was forced out. After all, he was in heat now. If a dragon did not go into heat for a few years, it would not be able to return to normal. As a result, his rationality was now fighting with his dragon nature. Slap. The dragon's tail, which was covered with fine silver scales, shook unwillingly, as if it wanted to hook the little witch's leg. Xiaya's expression was ugly as he tightly hugged his dragon tail. Don't appear. Go back quickly. He was a man who wanted to be her friend, so how could he reveal such an ugly and evil dragon tail? The dragon tail kept trying to seduce the little witch. Her ankles and waists were all key points that he could hook onto. With a hook and a drag, the dragon dragged his favorite treasure into his claws, grabbed it and ran. How could he not know the thoughts of this damned dragon's tail? Xiaya expressionlessly hugged the fluttering dragon tail and hit it from time to time to make it settle down. Don't be noisy. You're disturbing his little friend. If you make any more noise, I'll kill you. The dragon tail is obedient. Xiaya hugged the obedient dragon tail and continued to lick his lips, staring at the little witch. Don't move. We're friends.
T.
Chapter 2592. Yes, it should be possible to not be discovered. Xiaya thought so. He looked at her carefully. In the Golden Kingdom of Wealth, there were many glowing magic gems. The light of the gems covered the side of the little witch's face with a beautiful veil. Her skin was smooth like snow, and her lips were red. By the time Xiaya reacted, his lips had already landed on her delicate cheeks. If this continued, the little witch would realize something. In the light of the gems, the picturesque youth looked depressed and reluctant to leave her. Then he continued to squat, hugging his restless tail, guarding his treasure. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 95. Wei Bai felt that she couldn't sleep well. She couldn't help but pull the blanket and bury herself deeper. That great liar Xia definitely wouldn't dare to do anything to her. After all, they were friends. Life in the dragon's nest was slow, peaceful, and beautiful. The little witch didn't make a fuss about going out, but there were more and more things that belonged to the girl in the dragon's nest. Chairs, tables, cups for afternoon tea, and desserts from time to time. All kinds of leisure books, balls of wool, a damn lazy cat, and the little witch's favorite soft pillow and small bed. There was a war going on outside. Xiaya didn't plan to let her go out. He planned to win the war, settle everything, and bring her out when the continent was peaceful. Even if he had to stand behind the scenes, there were many inconveniences. It was better than letting her go out and take risks. Xiaya used magic to send messages and directly commanded the crusade against the royal family. He had been preparing for several years to overthrow the royal family. This time, when the evil god descended, he became the savior. And the royal family became the villain that caused the evil god to descend. It aroused great public anger. Xiaya's establishment of the Church of Light was supported by good public opinion, and it was enough to make his army invincible. He signed some documents and threw them into the teleportation array while looking at the little witch who was knitting. She knitted 2 scarves for him. A red scarf was wrapped around his neck. Although he wasn't cold, the little witch's scarf wasn't very exquisite. He was very happy to wear it every day. Now he had become a scarf lover. If it wasn't for the lack of people, he wanted to go out and show off the gift the little witch gave him. Wei Bai was bored of knitting sweaters, so she only knitted 3 scarves. The 2 longer ones were for Xiaya, one for herself, for hers was the most beautiful and the most laborious. As for Xiaya, he didn't care. Since she was tired of knitting scarves, she could only knit sweaters. Because she had no experience in knitting, the first one would definitely be ugly. I will give it to Xiaya when the time comes. In Wei Bai's eyes, Xiaya was a failed sweater trash can. Time continued to pass peacefully, slowly passing by. Her favorability slowly increased to 97. He was really treating her as a friend. She could even give him favorable impression points. Wei Bai, on the other hand, was staring at the time. Would this wait last forever? Actually, a lifetime was still okay. What he was afraid of was eternity. The thought of having to wander around here as a ghost was too tragic. Chapter 2593. Wei Bai had been studying with the system on how to change time, but she found that it was too difficult to study. She was distracted and knitted the sweater even uglier. Then she threw the ugly sweater to Xiaya. Out of sight, out of mind. But she found that Xiaya was smiling happily and even put on the sweater. It was as if a noble young master had become a beggar on the street. Wei Bai was speechless for a long time. After an unknown amount of time in the dragon's nest, Xiaya suddenly said, "Let's go home, Wei." Wei Bai was fighting hard with a ball of wool in her arms and looked at him blankly. Xiaya turned around and turned into a dragon. The dragon became very small, If he did a good job, he would be able to carry her on his back. The silver dragon rubbed its face against the girl's body intimately. It spread its wings and spoke human language. "Let's go, Wei Wei." Wei Wei Bai hesitated for a moment, then climbed onto the dragon's back with a few sweaters and scarves. The dragon walked out of the kingdom of gold coins and soared into the sky. Soon they returned to Rose Castle. Everyone was waiting outside the castle. The royal family was defeated too quickly. Everything was under the command of the Duke, and they achieved a great victory. The trial of the royal family and the elimination of the royal family's power were almost done.
The war on the mainland had also stopped.
Everything was perfect. Xiao was in a good mood, flying around with his little witch on his back. And waiting outside the castle were great mages, nobles, and meritorious officials with their daughters. They were all eagerly waiting for the Duke to return. Everyone knew that the Duke was the most powerful person in the entire kingdom now, and the Duke should have lost his wife. When the Duke got married, they couldn't curry favor with him even if they wanted to. When the evil god descended, the Duke dealt with it, but he disappeared. At the same time, his commoner wife disappeared. When Rose Castle didn't say anything, everyone thought that the commoner girl should have died in the battle. That girl appeared at the right time. It proved that the Duke also needed a woman. Whether she died or not wasn't a big problem. After all, in this day and age, she could be a bed warmer or a lover. The nobles and meritorious ministers who had no moral integrity stared at the gate of the castle. All he had to do was wait for the Duke to come back and give him his daughter and wealth. If he didn't curry favor now, he wouldn't have the chance when the Duke was crowned king. Finally, he saw the door of the castle open. However, there was no sign of the Duke. Some of the more powerful ones had already sensed that there was movement in the sky. The Archbishop of Light, in particular, had already raised his head respectfully. Then he saw a dragon. The Duke is so ostentatious. He actually has a dragon as his mount. Wait, that's not right. The dragon is carrying a person. But that should be a woman? Under everyone's dumbfounded gazes, the silver dragon retracted its wings. Its graceful and strong body landed on the ground quietly and lightly. The dragon's aura was astonishing. The silver dragon wings were as exquisite as gems shining under the moonlight. For the sake of landing steadily, the dragon completely disregarded its elegance and deliberately supported the ground with its magnificent dragon tail. Just so that the girl on the dragon's back wouldn't be too bumpy. The girl on the dragon's back slowly and carefully got down from the dragon's back. She was holding a bag that seemed to be soft.
She was also soft.
She cutely kicked the dragon with her feet, as if complaining that he was flying too fast or something. A dragon carrying the Duke's wife? Although everyone was surprised, it wasn't anything serious. Chapter 2594. Maybe the Duke let the dragon carry her. Although it's a pity that he didn't die, their daughter still has a chance. But the next scene made everyone, including the Archbishop, petrified on the spot. Wei Wei Bai walked faster, and the dragon's tail accidentally swept the stone, causing it to roll to her feet. She stepped on the stone and staggered, about to fall. The silver and elegant dragon quickly moved forward, becoming smaller and smaller. Like a phantom, the dragon turned into a human form, leaving behind a silver afterimage. The youth's hair fluttered, his arms wrapped around the girl's slender waist, and he lifted her up. Xiao curved his thin red lips, rubbed her face teasingly, and whispered, "I'm not taking advantage of you, but you're about to fall. As a friend, I'm helping you out of politeness." Then he turned around with his wife in his arms. He saw a bunch of eyesores blocking the entrance. The Duke's delicate eyebrows furrowed, and his voice suddenly turned cold. "What? Do you still have work to do? Haven't we already settled it? If you can't handle the rest, then scram." He had to handle everything. What did he want them to do? He didn't have enough time to date. Everyone silently took a few steps back. Their minds were filled with a terrible thought. The Duke was being ridden. He was being ridden by someone. In comparison, the Duke turning into a dragon was nothing. This was more heart-wrenching than the Duke being a bootlicker. The leading archbishop was silent for a moment before respectfully bowing his head and leaving. He had to go back and take some heart medicine. He was old and couldn't see his master being bootlicker like this. He was going to be a king, but why was he still acting like an old bootlicker? Too heart-wrenching. The others also left, giving up on the idea of sending their daughter. After all, no one was confident that their daughter could ride the Duke. Wei Bai looked up and found that when the archbishop left, one of the people following behind him coldly looked up at her. It was just a faint glance, and then he didn't look away. Wei Bai searched her memory. It was the Archbishop of the East District. At that time, the original owner wanted to attack him, but it had nothing to do with her. After all, the side mission was completed, and the main mission was almost done. All that was left was the time to be determined. After returning to the castle, he felt refreshed all over. After all, the dragon's nest had nothing but gold coins and jewels. It was too inconvenient. Xiao let Wei Bai take a bath and choose clothes. He had just returned home and had a lot of things to deal with. After dealing with some matters in a swift and decisive manner, he let go of his collar tiredly and picked up the wine to drink. The royal family was basically wiped out. Everyone was in the prison awaiting trial. After the trial, the Rose family would officially enter the palace, and the royal family would also hang the Rose badge. The battle finally came to an end. In the future, he would have more free time to accompany the little witch. As a friend, Shaya drank his wine. His eyes were gloomy and gorgeous through the red wine. However, everyone's standards were different. Just like him, his expectations of her couldn't be any lower. He could do whatever she wanted. Previously, when she was locked up, he thought that she was cute even when she fought him with all her might. But she was not happy. Shaya held the wine glass for a long time before putting it down. Then he went to find the butler. After the butler heard the request, he was silent for a long time before he left with a red face. Soon a special room was set up. The Duke's brain was very simple. He didn't know what her standards were. Then let's have a choice of rooms. She could choose whatever she liked. His physical fitness was good. He could even play with those sensational things, as long as she was happy. Shaya calculated insidiously. After all, a lifetime of friends was too miserable. He couldn't wear the title of a lifetime friend. Wei Bai came out of the bath and saw that the maid had set up dinner. She was very hungry and ate everything without being picky. She even drank 2 glasses of fruit juice with the taste of wine. After drinking, her face was red and her mind was in a daze. Her body was warm. The drink was poisoned? Smash. Smash. It was blocked in advance. Wei Bai. Then she rubbed her eyes and walked forward with her body full of anger. The maid came to lead the way. When she walked into the room, she found that there was something wrong with the room. And lying on the bed was a weak boy. The Duke trembled and reached out to her, sweating profusely. He said in pain, Wei, I was drugged by bad people.
Help me.
Wei Bai. Oh, here comes the drugging. Wei Bai was very familiar with this kind of plot. Can't you be a little more sincere? Come on, use rotten plots to hurt each other. Chapter 2595. She seemed to be struggling with her rationality. Shaya didn't panic at all. There was still time. Thus, he stared at her back and licked the back of his hand from time to time. This cat-like action was to appease the dragon side of him. Otherwise, his tail would pop out. His eyes were glued to her as he licked his hand, looking at her to quench his thirst. Wei Bai finally couldn't take it anymore. She staggered a few steps and turned around with a flushed face. Shaya saw that her eyes were dazed and had lost all rationality. He immediately put on a look of, do whatever you want, and even pulled up his shirt to reveal his beautiful muscular abdomen. Then, he saw Wei Bai walking towards him step by step. Shaya's eyes were filled with excitement. Then, he watched as she walked in front of him, passed by him, and walked past the bed. Shaya. Then, he turned around and saw that Wei Bai was searching for something. This room was full of gadgets. There was bound to be something she liked. But he thought that she would be shy and not dare to choose. Shaya wasn't afraid at all. His body was in such a condition that he would be fine even if he was cut with a knife. He heard that some aristocrats were very active and played with things like suffocation. He touched his neck. "It's fine. Come strangle me." Then, he saw that Wei Wei Bai had found a pair of scissors. She looked at it in confusion for a long time before turning back to look at him. Finally, she nodded in agreement and smiled. "Shaya, I won't let you die. I'm here to save you." Shaya looked at the scissors in her hand. What are scissors for? I've never heard of scissors for anything. As a result, he saw Bai Weiwei struggle to climb into bed. She held a pillow and pressed it against his face. "Cover your mouth. Don't bite your tongue. If we cut off the source of the explosion, you won't die." "Shaya, Weiwei Bai, it hurts a little. Bear with it. It's worth it to exchange a moment of pain for a life." With that, she picked up the scissors and was about to cut down with a beautiful and pure smile. Shaya jumped up as if his buttocks were on fire. He straightened his clothes, his face flushed red. "I found that the drug has worn off. I'm fine now," Wei Wei Bai said innocently. "Are you sure?" Shaya looked at the scissors in her hand with a look of despair.
"Yes."
Wei Wei Bai revealed a cute smile. "That's good." Shaya was afraid that she would really cut it, so he could only calmly turn around and leave. "Then I'll go take a bath and wash off the medicine." After saying that, he reached out to open the door, but he couldn't open it. He used all his strength to force the door open. He only regained his senses after he finished bathing and suppressed the medicine. Could it be that Wei Wei Bai had found out about his bad intentions and scared him like this? Wearing home clothes, Shaya returned to the house with a gloomy expression. He thought she had left. She saw Wei Wei Bai lying on the bed, fast asleep. The drug torture was still unbearable, but the amount he used was tolerable for a normal person. At most, it would make her lose her consciousness and weaken her self-control. She might have resisted too much, so she was tired. Shaya looked at her sleeping face for a while and wanted to take action, but he was too embarrassed. He finally sighed, pulled the quilt and wrapped her tightly, and then carried her out of the broken room. He didn't know how long it would take for him to come in again. He carefully stuffed Wei Wei Bai into the soft quilt. He lay on the bed and quietly stared at her with narrowed eyes. A delicate girl was the beauty of a flower at its most delicate. She was elegant to the extreme. Her face, as clean as snow on the mountain peak, had a thin layer of red. Her slender fingers unconsciously stretched out of the quilt and naturally curled up. Chapter 2596. Shaya couldn't help but reach out and hold her fingertips. The dragon's temperament was surging in his body like a rapid underground river, hidden and excited. It was much more powerful than any drug. Shaya suppressed it. He was willing to lie by the bedside and quietly watch over her. If he could guard her like this for the rest of his life, he would be satisfied. Shaya gently smiled in satisfaction. Slap. The dragon's tail appeared unwillingly. His expression turned ugly. He couldn't suppress his emotions, and the dragon's tail would run out. Sure enough, that damn tail was going to reach out again and hook the little witch's ankle. He held it down roughly with one hand, and then continued to quietly hold her fingertips with the other hand. Sure enough, being satisfied with guarding her for the rest of his life was just nonsense. He was just lusting after her, always lusting after her. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 97. When Wei Wei Bai woke up, she looked at the favorability with a strange expression. She was going to cut him with scissors. His favorability actually increased? The targets were all perverts. And they were all perverts in 1,000 different forms. Wei Wei Bai sighed to the system. I often feel that I'm so pure and beautiful. The system was cleaning up the trash can, trying to find if there was anything else that could be used. Hearing Wei Wei Bai's sigh, it fell into a deep silence. Pure and beautiful. Did the host misunderstand this description? In a cold and dirty dungeon. The old king was chained up and sat in the dirty water, staring at the prison cell with gloomy eyes. In the other cells, the members of the royal family and the nobles were wailing. Only the old king was like a terrifying hyena. Even if he was injured, he still had a terrifying gloominess. The trial would begin tomorrow. Although it was called a trial, it was actually a death sentence. Tomorrow, the gallows would wait for him. The old king knew that he had failed. After the death of his favorite prince, he failed to make the evil god descend. He knew that he had lost to the Rose family, not to the Rose Duke. The royal family would have to change their name in the future. But he was unwilling. He hated Shea West to death. If there was a chance, he would drag him down with him to die in peace. The old king looked outside the prison's cell gloomily. Suddenly, he saw a figure standing at the door. The old king took a look. The figure under the hood had a long, thin face like a vulture's. It was a middle-aged magician who looked familiar. The old king thought for a moment. He seemed to be the bishop of the East District of the Church of Light. The middle-aged man said gloomily, "Do you want revenge?" The old king looked at him coldly. The middle-aged man smiled coldly. "I know you're wondering why I betrayed the Duke. It's because the Duke has already signaled the Archbishop to give up on me." The old king frowned. Why did Shea give up on this guy? The bishop of the Eastern District was powerful in all aspects. The Archbishop also admired him very much. In addition, this guy also played a part in the destruction of the royal family, so his future should be pretty good. The middle-aged man laughed mockingly. "At first, I didn't know why the Archbishop hinted for me to leave. Later, when I saw the Duke's wife, I realized that the woman was a witch. She was here for revenge. That witch looked like she wanted to kill him. Her hatred was terrifying. It was still vivid in his mind. It was not uncommon for witches to take revenge. However, he was the first one to overestimate himself like that. If it wasn't for that little witch bringing the teleportation array, he would have killed her. Later, she disappeared without a trace, so he didn't spend much effort. He didn't expect that when he met her again, she was already the Duke's wife. Chapter 2597. An enemy actually climbed to such a high position. Then, as long as she whispered in the Duke's ear, would he still be alive? If he was destined to die a horrible death, then he would drag everyone down with him. Maybe he couldn't kill the Duke, but that little witch must pay for it with her life. When the old king heard his words, his eyes twisted with ecstasy. He said, "I know a spell formation that specifically targets witches. Tomorrow, in the middle of the trial hall, there will be the eye of the spell formation. As long as a witch walks on it, no matter how hard she tries to hide it, the witch's mark will be revealed." The whole continent hated witches. Witches had done too many sensational bad things. The cornerstone of the Church of Light's existence was the extermination of witches. They gained a huge reputation, which was why they stood on Shea's side when fighting against the royal family. I just need to let everyone know that Shea's wife is a witch. Then he only had two choices. Either kill your loved ones with your own hands for the sake of justice, or protect that witch and bear the consequences of losing your reputation. Either way, it was too light for the old king. But it was better than nothing. The old king couldn't help but laugh. The eerie laughter was unusually scary. The two old men, eager for revenge, in the dark prison, made a plan to ruin the Duke's reputation. And on Wei Wei Bai's side. But she heard a familiar prompt. Time, 100 years. Wei Wei Bai and the system. What a long time. What was the difference between this and waiting for time? At least it wasn't forever. Wei Wei Bai felt that she was a jinx. It took longer than a lifetime. But fortunately, she said to the system, "There is a time, which means that when the favorability is full, I can leave immediately." This didn't mean that she had to stay for 100 years. The system hurriedly checked the data and made sure that there were no hints, indications, or malfunctions. It heaved a sigh of relief and said, "Well, no problem. This time you can leave however you want." After Wei Wei Bai heard this, she relaxed. When the time was right, she would give Xia a few good looks. Once the favorability level was full, he would go home directly. What if she became an old woman after 100 years? Shaya, who was wearing formal aristocratic clothes, slowly walked over with a scepter in his hand. He thought about the message he received from the prison cell, and his eyes narrowed dangerously. A dark, crazed emotion rose in his eyes. They were just a few clowns, but it seemed like it could be used. Shaya looked up and saw the little witch sitting by the window, reading a book and drinking afternoon tea. The lazy cat that she had brought back from the dragon's nest was still lying by her feet. The little witch lazily rested her cheek on her hand, her expression peaceful and lovely. The darkness in his eyes disappeared. He walked over and knelt down on one knee. Naturally, he reached out and grabbed her chair. Then, he leaned forward and a rose appeared on his finger. This is nourished by magic. It will never wither. Wei Bai glanced sideways at him. The young man was wearing a beautiful and gorgeous aristocratic costume. The scepter that represented power was inlaid with a magic ruby, which was casually thrown aside by him. His deep purple eyes were filled with a gentle and harmless smile. From head to toe, only the red scarf around his neck was a bit out of place. But under his breathtaking beauty, he didn't look ugly at all. Wei Bai calmly took his rose and said politely, "Thank you." Shaya carefully restrained his hostility and anxiety, maintaining the gentle mask of a friend. "You don't have to thank me. Aren't we friends?" Wei Bai smiled. "Yes." Xia Yu smiled contentedly, but the tail behind her wanted to come out again. He really wanted to eat her. His patience seemed to be a bit short. Chapter 2598. The royal trial was the biggest event after the war ended. The descent of the evil god forced many great mages to the Rose family. The royal family was unscrupulous for their own interests, disregarding the disgusting image of righteousness, and completely destroyed themselves. Shaya Wester became the new savior of the mainland. Logically, after the new generation of the empire's leadership was established, the successor to the throne would be Shaya. The trial and coronation would be held on the same day. The butler, court etiquette master, and a bunch of servants came early in the morning with clothes and scepters. Among them were Wei Bai's clothes. Shaya tried to persuade Wei Bai for a long time to ask her for help. During the coronation, the new king would also coronate the queen. He had a marriage connection with her. It couldn't be changed. So if she didn't appear, others would suspect that they didn't get along well, leading to unrest in the new leadership of the royal family. Shaya reached out and asked the servant to put on a gorgeous coat for him. He thought of Wei Bai and looked at him worriedly, her eyes clear and bright. Will it really lead to unrest? Yes. It won't. Would there be more unrest than when the royal family was eliminated? The Rose family's current prestige was like an iron plate, and it wouldn't be overthrown no matter what. When he was halfway through putting on the coat, the door next door opened. Wei Bai walked out surrounded by maids, stepping on the sunlight. Her rose-colored dress was luxurious, and the fine rubies were inlaid into beautiful flowers. Her long hair was tied into a bun, and a few strands of hair fell on her cheeks, making her eyes look even more clear and charming. Shaya was casually tugging at his sleeves, and when he looked up, he was stunned for a long time. Wei Bai's face was powdered, with rouge and lipstick. She looked as delicate and soft as a cloud. She looked at him strangely. "What's wrong?" Shaya lowered his head, and his hair fell. He lightly curved his thin lips, unable to suppress his joy. "You're so beautiful." She was really beautiful, and his heart was about to jump out. For the first time, Shaya realized that he could look at a girl and feel shy. He had always been a shameless person. To think that he would be so thin-skinned. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 98. Just as he was about to button up his clothes, a pair of delicate hands gently pressed down on his beautiful golden-edged clothes. Her fingertips landed on his gemstone button. Wei Bai had already walked in front of him and was helping him button it. Shaya paused and stood there obediently, with his head lowered. He lowered his eyes and saw her serious face. Her fair and tender skin looked even more exquisite with a layer of makeup. Shaya's fingers had already reached her waist, but they didn't fall. After all, their relationship now was very careful. He didn't dare to break this rare piece. He would use time to slowly erase the person in her heart. Wei Wei finished buttoning her shirt and stepped back, revealing a happy smile.
Done.
Shaya's expression was gentle as he casually took the scepter that represented power and softly said, "Well, then let's go." With that said, his other hand was already holding her fingers. Then, he walked out hand in hand with her. The door to the huge and solemn castle hall was wide open. Outside the castle was a huge square that wasn't open to the public. The square was usually used by nobles and royalty. Only during special times would it open. Only during the trial of major criminals, the coronation of the royal family, marriage, or funerals would it open to allow civilians to enter. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.